Thanks very much. That's us ready and good to go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Audit Risk Scrutiny Committee. This feels certainly different. I've never been in this position before, working through the teams, that is. So, I'll just read the script to make sure I get everything right. I normally take this off the cuff, so I will. So, good morning, members, and welcome to the meeting of the Audit Risk Scrutiny Committee. This is our first meeting, with some members participating remotely. So, can I please remind you of a few of the arrangements in our guidance notes. The microphones should be muted and videos switched off when you're not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write speak in the Teams chat function, and you will be invited in to speak in order about new issues. Should your question or issues be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we deal with the business as effectively as possible. We might get a bit of non-compliance today, I think. The usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by a roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, can I remind you to either leave the Teams meeting for that period of time, or you could write leave in the Teams chat function and then rejoin, I should say. This is required to allow us to record members' attendance. So first item of business is said and apologies, and the Chair's approval for members' remote participation. So I'll approve the members' remote participation in case there is apologies from that side. But so, is it yourself, Claire? So I'm looking to Claire. Claire, can you do that for us, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. We've got 8 members in the Council Hall, just so that members on Teams can know who's here. We've got Councillor Bell, Councillor Campbell, Councillor Dryborough, Councillor McKee, Councillor Scobie sit on Teams. We have Councillor Maitland, Hagman, Johnston and Young. Councillor Carruthers currently not present but expected to join the meeting later. And since the papers were issued, Councillor Ingalls is now a member of the committee but has given his apologies today.
Double check it's on speak. Is that better? That's it sometimes. So if it goes off, I'll just remind myself to press that again. So item number 2 is declarations of interest. So in the room first, do we have any declarations of interest? I don't see any. All odds are in the Teams meeting. So virtual, do we have any declarations of interest? Nobody saying anything. I don't see anything on chat or Teams, so we'll take that as a no. No declarations of interest. Minute of the previous meeting of the 24th of February, pages 9 to 12, is for noting. Okay, everybody note that? Right, we're fine with that. It's item number 4. I don't think anybody else coming in. Don't see anything. So item number 4 is a report by external audit. On the report, let's get my notes again. I think it was Joe Brown that's speaking to this. So Dumfries Galloway comes to report by Head of Finance and Procurement. But I think it's Joe. Let's just get my notes. Sorry, just try to catch up. I think it's Joe Brown that's speaking to this. Is that correct? And Joe's in team. I see now, Joe. Sorry, I'm looking everywhere. Sorry, I'm just trying to get used to this. Joe, over to you, please.
Thanks, Peter. I'll just kick off with some messages, and my colleague John Boyd will pick up some of the detail in our external audit report. So this is our year-end annual report, which is obviously addressed to the Council and the Controller of Audit, and that concludes our external audit for 1920. We'd obviously like to thank all officers for their assistance during the audit process. It's been gratefully received. And what I would say is our audit has been undertaken fully remotely, which has resulted in the audit taking longer, but we have still been able to fulfil all our responsibilities as auditors and complete our work according to the original timeline that we set. The committee will be aware they saw our audit plan back in February, and since that audit plan we reviewed our risk assessment, and as part of that we included a significant audit risk around COVID-19, particularly considering the impact that had on our audit work and how we got audit assurance, but also any potential impacts on the Council's financial statements, and that's set out in this report. Our materiality, we didn't change our baseline that we set out in the plan, which was 1.5% of gross expenditure. So materiality was set at just over 8 million for the group. And at this point in time, we plan to sign the accounts later on today. And at that point, it will be an unmodified opinion. What I will say within our opinion is we draw attention to an emphasis of matter, which relates to your own disclosures in the accounts around a material uncertainty over valuations of land and building arising as a result of COVID. And that's something that I think is certainly appearing in most public sector audit opinions, is this emphasis of matter, drawing readers of the accounts to that paragraph. But if I just pass you briefly to John, he can pick up on some of the detail and then open it out for questions.
Thanks, Jo. Just to take the committee through the detail within the report, a report structured in a way to allow us to discharge our responsibilities under the Code of Audit Practice. This requires us to provide an audit opinion and assurance around the financial statements, but we also have responsibilities in relation to the wider scope audit dimensions. So what a report looks to do is cover the area of the financial statements and their overall work and conclusions on the accounts, and then those wider scope audit dimensions, and in particular providing our conclusions on the areas of significant risk identified within our annual audit plan. I think the main thing in terms of, and Jo mentioned it there, in terms of the response to the financial statements themselves, if I touch on that first, within pages 8 to 12, I've outlined there, or sorry, 7 to 12, I've outlined there our response to the significant risks, and those are those risks that were identified in our annual audit plan. As part of our audit planning process, we identified a new significant risk relating to COVID-19. Now, this was actually had a number of areas of impact or potential impact on the financial statement, including the recoverability of debtors, transactions around the year end, given the change in council's operating models during a period of remote working with COVID. The COVID pandemic impacting towards the end of the financial year, as well as the valuations of property, plant and equipment. And as Jo touched upon there, the council's valuers have disclosed the material valuation uncertainty in relation to the valuation of property, plant and equipment, and that's reflected in the annual accounts. Our emphasis of matter effectively refers the reader of the accounts to that disclosure that has been made by management. We've touched upon a couple of areas in our report for opportunities to enhance some of the disclosures in the accounts, as well as looking at some of the arrangements in place during the financial year, particularly around the valuation of property, plant and equipment. One of the requirements under the CIPFA Code of Practice and Local Authority Accounting is a formal valuation report should be produced. As the in-house valuer produces a summary valuation, and this is then reported to the finance team, we've encouraged management to produce a full valuation to enable that sort of independent scrutiny and challenge from the finance team. In terms of the wider scope dimensions, what we've concluded on and reported on are those areas that were identified in our audit plan. So this is looking at areas of financial sustainability, financial management, governance and transparency, and value for money. And across each of those areas, we've considered the council's arrangements in demonstrating value for money and best value. I think I'll take the detail as being read, but just to touch upon some of the kind of key messages that we've included within our report. I think firstly is just reflecting in the council's financial position and outturn position. It has been another year where the council has maintained the unearmarked general reserve balance at 2% of your annual planned expenditure, demonstrating good financial governance. For 2021, it's obviously a period of uncertainty given the impact of COVID-19. However, the existing targets do appear achievable for the Council. It's looking beyond that where I think we've recognised that there will be more significant challenges facing the Council given the level of forecast savings that will be required to balance the Council's budget in 2021, 22 and 22, 23. So we've included reference to that within our annual report. We've also just touched upon in our report around the performance measures and the importance of the Council being able to demonstrate through its performance reporting the delivery and achievement of the Council's performance measures. The strategy performance indicators, the framework was amended in year, and as you'll see in our wider scope commentary, we've identified opportunities for enhancing the Council's current reporting arrangements around those to ensure ongoing compliance with those and being able to demonstrate best value in the delivery of Council services. That was really the main areas I was going to touch upon in terms of the financial statements audit and wider scope audit. Within our annual report, and you'll also see within our letter of representation that we present to the committee, we also report on uncorrected misstatements and misstatements that were corrected during the course of the audit. There was one misstatement in relation to the McLeod defined benefit pension scheme. The committee may recall that last year there was an adjustment to recognise an estimate of the impact on the defined benefit pension obligations in relation to an ongoing legal case in relation to McLeod. The actuary updated the valuation last year to include an estimate of what they thought the impact of that would be. During the course of the audit, the UK government proposed a remedy within pension funds as to how that arrangement will actually be settled, and the proposed remedy, while still up for discussion, is likely to have a less significant impact on local government pension funds than initially estimated. So the Council has obtained an amended actuarial valuation to reflect the remedy solution, which has reduced the defined benefit pension scheme liability as at the 31st of March 2020. So you can see that just in our appendix on audit adjustments, along with some of the other kind of disclosure adjustments that were included within the accounts. We have included in our appendix a proposed management action plan as well as follow-up from our 18-19 recommendations, and these have been agreed with officers of the Council and implementation timetable within that. I think that was really everything, Chair, that was going to cover as part of the report, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Joe, for that presentation. Very much appreciated. So I'm looking physically in the room first. I'll open it up to questions to members I can see in the room, and I'm looking for what's on the chat and so on to see if any virtual members are coming in. Obviously, as per recommendation 2.1, I think we've received that. So that's, is that somebody coming in? Jane, sorry, Jane, it's you, then John Young. I see you coming in through now. Jane, you're first. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, John, for your presentation of the accounts. You mentioned at the very end there the follow-up on the 18-19 recommendations, and I'm rather conscious of having gone back, because having looked at those, I then gone back to the previous set of accounts to look at the recommendations there. And one of the things that you do pick out in particular is risk management. And that appeared in the accounts before, the previous accounts, as to what our approach was with respect to risk management, corporate risk management, and the approach that we took as a very new Audit and Risk Committee. I would like to ask you about what we maybe should be doing in any greater degree to what you have received from management. Management, you'll see at the end, have said, I'm looking at members on page 54 of the report here. The follow-up and then the management comment is that we've got 3 risk registers, which we agreed on the 25th of June. But I'm rather conscious that as a committee, that we don't really have a proper oversight, I think, of risk management. And I would like to ask John, as our external auditor, whether he would agree with me that actually it might be the case that we should do a little bit more, be a little bit more proactive in considering risk management. I'd be glad to have your feelings, please. Thanks, Chair.
Over to you, John or Joe, whoever's responding to that.
If I pick that up first, and then if John wants to add anything, I'm sure he will. I think in terms of the management response, we agree with the management response that's set out there around risk management, and I think thinking about it as an audit, risk and scrutiny committee, I think what would be really beneficial for this committee is to be clear of that risk framework that exists across the council, particularly where risks are considered and scrutinised and reviewed and challenged at the service level and the service committees, and therefore at what level does that take place, and therefore what is the specific role around this committee in terms of supporting the council in its risk management framework. So I think whilst you've now got a greater awareness and documentation of risk, it's sitting within the service committees but not necessarily coming through audit and risk. And I think what we see committees do, what we see other committees do, is in an audit and risk committee seek assurance around particularly those corporate council-wide risks, that those are being effectively managed and the control environment is in place to manage those risks. And you automatically get some of that assurance at the moment through your internal auditors. But I think it would be a welcome addition to this committee to have a framework around how do you assure yourself around risk management, the committee's role, and where in the committee's calendar and schedule would you document and consider that assurance around risk management. So whilst we're comfortable as a council, you're identifying risk and you've got a process in place to mitigate and review risk, I think it is more around the role of this committee. And I think there's a good opportunity for you to at least have a bit more of a scrutiny role, particularly at the council-wide risk level.
Thanks for that, Joe. John, do you have anything to add? John Boyd?
Yes, Chair. Just as Joe was touching upon our recommendation, I think the key aspect that we have observed in during the course of the year is the progress that the council are making within this. I think, as you'll note from the response, I think there's an intention to have more regular reporting of the 3 risk registers. It's just that actually at the time of undertaking our audit, obviously that programme hadn't been in place. There is a degree of balancing the committee's role, which is quite active in terms of scrutiny and undertaking sort of deep dive reviews, but also that position of being able to step back and take a kind of almost a strategic review around the council's risks, and moving away from that kind of service level operation. So it's always a balance between the two.
Thanks, John. Jane, are you content with your answers? I did think in item number 12, when we get to there, that might be something we might discuss there. But
Well, do you know, Chair, that's exactly what I was going to say. Great minds think alike. That's where I think we should probably have a think about it. Thank you.
thanks very much for that, Jane. Okay, and Joe and John. I've got 3 names, just so it's clear, because I think you put your hand up for the second time, John. So we've got John Young next, then Malcolm Johnston, then John Campbell, who's physically here in the room. So John Young, you're next. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Chair. is really following on from Councillor Maitland. At the bottom of page 39, it states, the Council has a range of significant third-party suppliers providing a range of services, and not list them, particularly care, education, construction. And I'm just wondering if we really have proper oversight of our external suppliers and purchasers of services, you know, and how can we look at what's happening in, say, care at home? How can we have proper scrutiny of the processes of our commissioning when we don't really see these figures to analyse them?
Thanks for that question, John. I just want to make a comment on that. Just to start off with, I've been banging on about a procurement committee for a number of years, and I think that would probably address that, but I'll put it to either Joe or John in regards to an answer. Joe, you first, if you've got something.
Sorry, Chair, I was just trying to find the page reference within our report, but I think if I'm maybe looking at the right place, I think there's an element where the new PMO governance structures will pick up on some of the points that have been raised, but I don't know, to be honest, if maybe Paul Garrett's better placed to answer that from an operational perspective.
Paul, are you on the line? I think it's page 25 in your report, Joe. Paul, can you come in and answer that?
Chair, before Paul comes in, there's a mix up there. We're getting pages with Grant Thorntons and we're getting council pages. It's hard to follow, like.
Yep. So I think, John Young, you referred to the council pages, which I think is page 39, I think is what you said, and I think it's page 25, if I'm reading that correctly. Page 25 of your report, Joe. It references trunk roads, the very last paragraph in about there. So, John, if you could just clarify that, then we'll come back to Paul, just to, if you can add anything to that, Paul Garrett.
Yes, it's page 25 of the Grant Thornton report, page 39 of the council report.
Thanks for that, John. So, Paul, can you add anything to John's question?
Really, just to say that obviously the kind of concerns that Councillor Young has raised are similar to those that are being discussed at the moment through the review of procurement standing orders, which is being conducted by the Finance Procurement and Transformation Committee, and some of those concerns have been discussed in a bit of detail, particularly at the workshop last week. What the intention is that through subsequent workshops, members get the opportunity to feed into proposals to improve our oversight of procurement activity, supplier management and commissioning activities within the council, and there'll be a final set of recommendations presented to full council in December this year. So those are the type of issues that are being considered through that process.
Thanks for that, Paul. John?
Thank you, Chair. Can I make a second question on a different matter?
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Page 134 of the council papers. It's the long-term debtors, and I brought this up last year. The council has £10 million outstanding to it, mostly from the Scottish Police Authority. Now, at the rate of repayment, it will take over 40 years for that debt to be settled. I brought this up last year, and the council officer said this is something that they will look at to see if they can hasten the repayment. Has anything been done, or are they quite content just to have a trivial amount paid to the council every year?
Go ahead, Paul, if you're the right person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, my understanding is that the bulk of that amount relates to outstanding debt in relation to capital investment undertaken when the police and fire services were part of the council. Under the agreed process whereby police and fire moved away from local authority control to Police Scotland and the national fire arrangements, the arrangements previously in place in terms of repayment of borrowing were maintained at the previous levels. So that is the national scheme in terms of the police and fire services pay off that debt in line with what they would have done if they had remained part of the council. So I don't think we're able to significantly influence that arrangement, potentially through voluntary discussion with the police and fire services. I have to admit, I wasn't aware of the discussion last year, or I've not picked up on that subsequently in terms of discussing with police and fire whether they would be willing to accelerate their payments. But I mean, it is something that is in line with the national scheme in terms of how the police and fire should be paying for their formal capital expenditure.
Okay, but I mean, a 40-year payoff time, I wish I could get that on my properties. Thank you, Paul.
Lenient terms. Thanks, John. Thanks for your question. So we have Councillor Johnson, Malcolm next, and then Councillor John Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's page 21 of the council papers, page 7 of the actual report, and it's around the issues of end of year accruals and debtor balances. Now, given that we've clearly had a problem in the past with this area, I just wonder if the audit was carried out in a slightly stricter way, focusing on that. Has any changes been made to help to build up confidence that the figures stated are accurate?
Thanks for that, Malcolm. Joe, give you the first chance, then John if required.
Thanks. So as you can see outlined in our annual report, we do look at cut-off as a significant audit risk, particularly around expenditure and income. And when we're doing our testing, we're looking at 2 months prior to the end of the financial year and 2 months post-financial year to look at the council's arrangements for that cut-off and making sure those transactions are recorded within the right financial year. And as part of our audit, we didn't identify any matters arising. We didn't identify any exceptions around our testing, which we had to discuss with management. And we could see the officers applied their arrangements for putting in place and calculating accruals and cut-off, and they applied those consistently. Having been aware of some of the discussions, particularly around the trunk roads, we continue to apply professional scepticism in this area, working to our materiality level, and we're comfortable there was no matters in our testing that we would want to draw to your attention.
Malcolm, you want to come back on that? You okay?
No, I'm okay with that. It's just given that, you know, the issues that we've had in the past, I would have felt a bit more comfortable if there had been a wee bit more of a tightening up, because if you just used the exact same process that we used before and we ended up in the position we ended up in, how do I know that we're not currently in the same position? That's all.
Go on, Joe, will you want to come back in there?
No, it was just to obviously say one of the things that we have looked at and paid particular attention to this year, as we always do around cut-off, is looking back to any particular clauses within contracts and any particular accruals or judgments that's made around the contracts that are in place, just to be assured of ourselves around the council's arrangements. And there was nothing that we did identify in testing, but we'll continue to obviously speak to finance officers to understand any changes to arrangements around cut-off, accruals, any other control changes that happen across the council going forward, and make sure we factor those into our testing as appropriate in future years as well.
Okay, thanks very much. I think you're content with that, Malcolm. You've got a content look anyway, so we'll move on. It's Councillor John Campbell. You're next, John.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, John did touch on this particular part that I was looking at, was the valuation of property, plant and equipment. The thing that caught my eye that the valuation was based on the BECIS forecast data rather than the actual market prices. But I noticed that in the actual accounts, note 5 makes reference to that, and also in the action plan, which is on page 49 of members' papers and page 35 of the actual audit report. To avoid potential error in the future valuations, the Council should ensure that current market data is used in the valuations. I suppose that the risk at the moment, because I see that the agreed management responses, I don't know how much more could be done there, But because we've got an ongoing pandemic and, you know, we don't know what the outcome of, you know, what the trade agreement with Europe, if any, comes about. So there is a potential severe risk round about that. I don't know if any more could be added to that. Another point that I picked up was the waste management. I noticed that both in the follow-up of 1819, it was a recommendation number 7, and it's also in the action plan for this year, which is recommendation 4, which is on page 50 of members' papers, page 36 of the audit. If that's been picked up twice, I think what I would be concerned about is that we're not having oversight of what's actually happening. I mean, we haven't had the subcommittee, the waste implementation subcommittee, for a while. There was a recommendation that it be suspended, but I think that because this is ongoing, and the statement from that particular recommendation, it says that the Council objectively reviews the actual cost incurred in the service delivery as well as the operational performance against those forecast in the options paper and the waste strategy to ensure that the Council realises planned benefits, demonstrating value for money and in service delivery. Now, to do that, I think the Waste Management Subcommittee needs to have scrutiny over those sort of implementations. So if you could just sort of cover those 2 points, that would be great. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that, John. Joe or John, who wants to cover that? I'm sorry, Paul, I missed you earlier.
Thanks. Just picking up on the first point there around valuations, and there's a number of judgments within the valuation process, and we are comfortable with management's response that's outlined against that action. In reality, there's little further action that the Council can take around valuations. As auditors, we've satisfied ourselves between the difference between the actual rates and the forecast rates and confirmed that there's no material impact on the accounts. And we've got a detailed paper from officers which support their assessment around that. I think the observation, particularly around valuations, thinking about COVID-19 in particular and any long-going impact on that, I think you would probably see much more impact and movement in your valuations in the 2021 financial statements, when the material uncertainty will be able to probably be better quantified by the valuer. But we're satisfied with the response there around valuations. Picking up on the point around waste management, obviously as your external auditors, it's not for us to comment on the governance structures and the reinstatement of subcommittees. I think our point there is around, obviously, you're now made the decision around waste management, you've got a strategy in place and you're implementing that strategy, and you've got a clear plan to deliver waste management services in the area in a different way. And our point just continues to be around, at a point in time when you assess the value for money for those arrangements, and the management response recognises that that's a long-term programme, and whilst it will continue to be evaluated, that point in time where you can then evaluate and demonstrate value for money is still probably a little bit further out, and that's why we've still got that in our management response and management action as something just to keep on the Council's radar. I don't know if John, if you wanted to say anything further, or if Paul had any particular comments around waste management that he wanted to bring out.
Just to kind of reinforce what Joanne's saying regarding waste management, obviously there's significant change in that service, and it's a major programme that will take a lengthy period. So during that process, there's obviously a need to review both the revised operating arrangements, but also the cost implications of that. Members will be aware that when we initially ended the PFI arrangement, we identified a significant funding gap in relation to the difference between the cost of the new service and the funding currently budgeted to support it. The service have done a lot of work and have reduced quite significantly that funding gap over the intervening period, but there is still further work to be done before we fully implement the revised arrangements, and the expectation is that the service will look to bring the projected cost further down so that it can be accommodated within the budget level, but that's something we'll have to continually monitor over the upcoming period.
Thanks, Paul. So what I'm going to do, John, just before I'm going to ask Liz just to comment. So I think what I'm hearing from John is that it's about oversight and scrutiny of this particular. He sees it as a risk, and how do members actually see that? How do they get involved, make decisions? How do they get the proper oversight that's needed? So I wonder if you could comment in regards to there might be about the re-establishment potential of the Waste Subcommittee, or moving on, meeting more regularly. Please, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, there is a report coming to the review of Standing Orders Subcommittee on the 8th of October that will look at the recommendation from the Waste Subcommittee about the future arrangements. Should the Waste Subcommittee be disbanded, then it would be reported to the Communities Committee, which is the reporting committee for that service.
Thanks for that, Liz. John, you want to come back in, I think?
Yeah, just to say, yeah, I think if we like to go to the review of Standing Orders Committee, and then we can take it from there. I'm quite happy with that, Chair.
Well, thanks so much for that, John. I think it's a relevant point to be raised, and I think it's right throughout a number of reports. It's the level of oversight and scrutiny that the members actually getting the information leading up to them. It's right through. It's not just this one. I've got Councillor Willie Scobie, then Stephen Thompson, then Archie Driver. So, Willie, you're first. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And it's on the same subject of waste on page 34 of the Council's numbers. And it's really looking at the roles and responsibility of audit and risk, not just Waste Management Subcommittee, in terms of how and what we audit. And I'm looking at this, and it's very much focused on 1920 moving forward through public consultation to develop a new waste management. But I think it was said recently in the Parliament that to learn lessons for the future, we've got to look at the past. And I don't see any reference to the past in terms of the pilot project, where there was a great deal of purchase of equipment, vehicles and equipment, and yet when we look at the valuation, it's on land and building. And I just wonder if the auditors did have a look at that, and if so, if they would want to make any comment or have a view on the matter in terms of the Council's reputation and public confidence in moving forward on this new waste management, given the amount of money not only in PFI and the buying out of that contract, but also on all the plant and equipment that was purchased and at public cost. Was that real value for money, and should it really be investigated?
So, Joe, I suppose I'll probably just ask you to answer that in the best way you possibly can in regards to just the question that was put up. I think there's some relevant points here that you brought up, Willie, but I don't know how I'll leave it for the auditors to answer that.
Thanks. I think in terms of last year's annual report to the Council and the Auditor General, we commented specifically around the waste management PFI buyout, and particularly around the value for money around that termination of that contract and the financial cost to the Council and the Council's evaluation process. So I think that was probably captured in last year's annual report, whereas this year we're looking specifically around actions within 1920 and that forward look. I think in terms of the work we've done around wider scope is we've obviously had a look at those waste management papers, we've looked at some of the Council decision making and the Council's plans that are in place, and we are comfortable that the Council are considering all risks and considering lessons learned as they go through this project. I think from our review of the documentation, it's captured in places in terms of the learning and the lessons learned as the long-term project and the new waste management strategy is put into place. But I'm happy just to take another look at the commentary in the report and maybe look and make sure that if we had looked specifically around any of the lessons learned the council have done in 1920, whether we could pull that out a bit more explicitly within the report, as well as what we've got in there around the forward look. I'm not sure that specifically answers the question that was set out, but I'm certainly happy to look at the wording that we've captured in the report. And one of the things we continue to look at as external auditors, and it came up in the best value assurance report as well, is how the council itself learns lessons. So we can see that you are learning lessons in things like, obviously, trunk roads, taking that forward, but also the waste management contract, and then historically the lessons to be learned around DG1. So we can see that the council are learning those lessons. It's potentially not as well articulated in this report, but it was articulated in the best value assurance report as well.
Willie?
Yeah, and Joe referred to the termination contract. It's not just the termination contract and whether we have learned lessons. It was also around the purchase of vehicles, plant and equipment on the pilot project that was running in the Wigtonshire area. And while lessons may have been learned, it's a pretty costly lesson to the public in moving to the new one. And again, I didn't hear whether it's within the auditor's responsibility to recommend, but whether there should be an investigation into the amount of monies that have been used and wasted from the pilot moving forward, because that pilot was supposed to have been rolled out many years ago. And never was. So I wonder what the lessons were that were learned and whether there should be an investigation into it.
So I suppose what I'm hearing Willie saying as well, Joe, before you come back in, is just that, so there was a lot of vehicles bought that couldn't be used. There was a pilot project that was supposed to be rolled out across Dumfries Galloway, one of the 4 districts. It seemed to was actually received well, I think, from the members of the public over there after a piece of time. But those receptacles that were bought, never used, still sitting in storage. So there was a lot of money wasted, but regulations and laws changed, and there was decisions at government level that certainly forced the hand of the Dumfries Galloway Council to make different decisions. But I don't know how. I'll again come back to the point I made earlier. It's for you to kind of answer this question, if you possibly can, for Willie.
So I think your observations are correct, obviously, around the point about laws and regulations changing. I think it's been well documented. If you could go back in time, having a waste management contract under a PFI, probably just the nature of the services, the nature of the changing regulations, it's not as well suited to a PFI model, but that is the legacy issue, not the forward look issue. And if members are comfortable, I'd quite like to just pick up with Paul Garrett as an action just around the pilot and making sure we capture that within our report. But I think the key point is factors have happened out with the council's control. So we are comfortable that we understand those factors, where those factors sit, and the actions the council are taking. But I think there is maybe a point about how we better articulate the pilot and just some of that commentary on the waste management within our wider scope. And I'm happy to pick that up with Paul out with this meeting and just tidy up our annual report to make that a bit clearer, if that would be helpful to members.
I think what I was hearing particularly through Willie, because he's mentioned it a couple of times, that does it merit an investigation? He's asking for your view, and I don't know if that's Willie who's trying to get in there, so I'll let Willie put that in his own words. That's why I said I don't know how we can answer this question, but it's up to you, Joe. But I'll let Willie in first, then, just, if you don't mind, just come straight back in.
No, you've articulated that, and whether they have a view and whether there should be an investigation, because it's not just about the PFI and the changes in the law. The pilot project met the regulations. It met in terms of recycling, where everything didn't go to the Eco-Deco plant, and it was finally recognised and accepted by the people in the area. What did change was that it wasn't suitable in a number of different ways. So it didn't meet the regulations as far as I understand in the law in terms of recycling. It was all the purchase all the vehicles were purchased as a rollout. And I think that it does require some investigation.
So just come back on that, Joe, please.
So obviously I can comment as your external auditor, and in our opinion, having looked at the waste management documentation, having considered things like the council strategy, the council's arrangements going forward, the council's plans to ensure value for money, personally there's nothing in there that I would have a concern over in terms of the manner in which the council has approached this and the way the council is managing this as a long-term project, which would cause me to flag a concern to you, which could then potentially result in an investigation. It's not for me to determine whether there's an investigation, but certainly as your external auditor, there's nothing that we've identified which would cause or trigger us to have a concern that we would want to flag that to you as a committee.
Thanks, that's what I kind of expected to hear. I didn't think it would be appropriate for you to recommend to the council we'll have an investigation, but certainly highlight the potential deficiencies. So, no, but thanks for the question. Well, I think it was well and worthwhile put in. So, we've got Councillor Stephen Thompson, Councillor Archer Driver, then we'll draw to a conclusion after that. Stephen, you first.
Thanks, Chair. It was actually going back to page 39, and Councillor Young had first raised this around external contracts, but I think there's another level to that where we as a council have a statutory duty to provide certain things, and often we'll maybe outsource that to a third party, but that becomes much more complicated when that statutory duty still belongs to us. However, it may be through, for example, health and social care partnership or a direction from the IJB, whereby we are, as a partner, will help deliver according to something, yet we may not be the commissioner. So it then comes down to, this is an issue we have in social work, because we want to know how well our services are performing from a partnership perspective, and we have the responsibility, but it'll be reported through a different mechanism, such as the Clinical and Care Governance Committee under the IJB. So it's almost third party, maybe it's fourth party, I don't know what the term for it would be, but we aren't necessarily the procurer of the services sometimes, yet we will ultimately have a responsibility. And I'm thinking back to the start of this pandemic out with our control, but it certainly revealed issues about, well, who does the responsibility lie with to provide PPE for personal assistance, an SDS option, whatever it might be. Now, we as the authority have a duty of care, and when that's outsourced, or there's a separation, if you like, or a choice, when things fail, it still falls then to us, to our responsibility. So how do we get reporting back and the assurances that things are being delivered? Similarly with care homes, clearly there's been a lot of moves afoot to address some of the, or to strengthen how we have an oversight of care homes as a result of this, because we may not, as elected members, have taken comfort in the reporting that we've received on that. And similarly, care at home, it's often third parties. In fact, the bulk of our care at home services are provided by third parties. So, however, when things fall, it's not us that necessarily commissions that. We do it under direction from the IJB. So that I think it's a little bit more complicated than just procuring and then monitoring that service. There's another layer about, well, what if we're jointly commissioning something with somebody else, and the natural reporting mechanism is through that body and not us. So it's maybe just to add a little bit of context to that. I mean, I don't know if that can be captured or if that's something that is now being looked at more closely.
Thanks for that question, Stephen. Joe, I definitely want you to come back to give us your thoughts in regards to that. It's a point I hadn't actually thought about, but for me it's around about the risks in particular. It's a governance question in real terms. But Joe, could you come back, please?
The only observation I would make is around that point around the governance and transparency, and being clear around where the council's duty of care sits and where the assurances come from, whether that's coming through a different party or it's coming through a different subcommittee. It's about understanding the reporting and assurance arrangements and ensuring those are clear and as open and transparent as possible. And I think, to be honest, the landscape around governance and transparency, particularly picking up the councillors' points, is becoming more and more complex. So obviously as a council, it's key that you're aware of the sources of assurance and where your duty of care lies and where those assurances are coming from, and at what point it's the council's obligation and what point it's a third party's obligation, and that landscape is becoming more complicated. So I think the councillor's observations are a fair observation, and it's something that we continue to look at when we're considering governance and openness and transparency. And it's certainly something we can pick up as part of next year's audit in terms of the wider scope side of governance, and have a specific focus around the council's assurance framework for those third party contracts or third party procurement which feed into the council.
You okay with that, Stephen? Stephen's content with that, just for the record. Yeah, I think good suggestion, actually. It's how does that come back up through then, maybe through the Social Work Committee. We might see that. So our last speaker is Councillor Archie Driver. Archie.
Thanks very much, Chair. And just on the last point itself, obviously we've been told many times since I was elected in 2007 that PFI was the only game in town at one particular time. My own opinion is that everything should be run by the council anyway. That's just my background and the way it is. But I'd just like to come back to the point on the Waste Management Subcommittee. It was established, and I agree with Liz, that it was established to look at the development of the in-house council waste strategy and the transition arrangements from the PFI to back in-house, and it's one of the proudest things I've ever done as a chair to bring that back in-house. It was agreed by all members of the Waste Subcommittee that it should go back to scheme of establishment, review of establishment of the committee, to give it back to the Communities Committee for them to oversee. And I think it was Malcolm Johnson who actually supported me in taking that forward. So I'm really glad that is the case. So we'll wait and see what happens with the scheme, a review of establishment of committees. There is another subcommittee date in the diary. I think it's in November sometime, just in case there needs to be a final sort of development to take it back to communities. But I think I'm pleased the way things have went, but certainly all members of that committee agreed to take it back to communities.
No, thanks for that update, Archie. But I suppose it's just the point that's being made, it's regards to, a bit like procurement, it was made there as well. It's how do we best, as a council, as members of the council in particular, actually, we can make sure we get the proper assurances, dig in at I suppose, a local level, even potentially going out to that operational level. We see what's going on. That's, I think, some of the assurances people are looking for. And when you get that in a larger committee, it's sometimes more difficult to get that level of assurance and even ask the right questions. So I don't have anybody else coming in. No look for anybody else to come in either. So we'll go to recommendations. Claire, a number of actions we've spoken about. Have you maybe captured them, Claire? We can let you reflect on that. But I'll go through the recommendations and then we'll accept, I think, just that you've captured these actions. If you can just reflect on them at that point in time. So recommendation number 1 to receive the external auditor's report on the 1920 audit, as we've done as per Appendix 1. So we've noted that. We've received that, sorry. Recommendation 2 is to approve the letter of representation to be certified by the Head of Finance and Procurement and appended to the audit report as detailed as per Appendix 2. Thank you. And the same for virtual. So recommendation 3 is to approve the audited accounts, which will be certified by the Head of Finance, Procurement and Grant Thornton after this meeting as detailed as per Appendix 3. And 4 is note that the certified accounts will be made available to all members before the 31st of October this year, when they will be available on the Council's website as detailed in paragraph 3.6 of this report. And so we've agreed to note that. Is there any particular actions that you think we picked up on, Claire, going through there? If you don't mind, there was a couple in particular, I think. Liz, sorry.
I've certainly noticed 2. One about the waste PFI vehicles and plant, which Joe will liaise with Paul about in finalising their final report. And also for next year's audit, there'll be a look at third-party assurance arrangements.
From Stephen, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. No, thanks so much for that. So we've agreed that. Item number 5, I think we're on. I'll just turn my pages. So it's page 167 of our papers. It's the review of the road service, scope of review. This has been asked for via full council. We've certainly asked for this to come to this committee, so this report provides the opportunity for the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee to consider the scope and methodology of the review of road services. Apologies for my mix-up in papers, but I think it was Stephen Herrick that will speak to this. I'm just sure of that. I see you're online. It is Stephen. I see from my notes now that it's there. So what I'll do, Stephen, I'll ask you to speak to this, rather than just, I'll not ask if you've got anything to add. I'll ask you to actually speak to this. It's up to as long as you want, a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, up to you. This particular report, put a bit of background to it, and then I'll open it up to questions thereafter.
Morning, Chair. Thank you. If you can hear me okay, I'll continue. In terms of the road service review, yeah, we've hit the ground running on that in terms of the full council setting the scope for the review. And as you know, we've had the members' seminar on the 1st of September, where we set out the kind of background to the review, give background information on the road service, the drivers for change in terms of what we were anticipating was kind of moving us forward for transformation of the road service. And then we did a bit of time with members on the scope of the review itself, and talked about the outcomes that as a service we're wanting to achieve in the review with a more effective, efficient, unified, customer-focused service, looking at development of the management structure, look at development of the documentation for the processes, a review of all the processes within the service, and the development of an implementation action plan to take forward change and transformation within the road service in the year ahead. We've following the members' seminar, we've had in the middle of a number of staff seminars where we're doing the similar SWOT analysis, and from that we're capturing the emerging themes, and we'll be reporting those to Communities Committee on the 1st of October, and we have the final kind of initial staff session tomorrow on that at the depot at Barnkirk and Newton Stewart. So a lot of good input from staff and kind of building on members' views on the SWOT analysis and the emerging themes. Over the next month through October, we're looking at kind of wider stakeholder engagement, looking at how we get customer feedback in terms of surveys, online webinars and the digital survey, with a view to capturing, make sure that we've got that kind of wider customer feedback in the review process, with the idea that we're taking recommendations for the road services development to Communities Committee in November, and returning again in December to Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee to talk about those recommendations. So I'm happy to take any questions. I've got Karen Brownlee here, who's managing the project for the service at the present time, and between us we're happy to take questions on the paper, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that presentation, Stephen. So we've got the first hand up, Councillor Graham Bell. Graham, you can come in.
Thanks, Chair. It's interesting. Obviously, I couldn't make the workshop, and looking at on page 168, the scope 3.7, analysis of the services, management and staff structure and capacity, benchmarking with other councils. Well, like any department, if it was social services or education services, we would have these sort of standard templates in place, and anyone running a business or any management structure would have these sort of templates in place, and the expert advice, including professional associations. Now, is there anything further we should maybe be adding to this? Obviously, a number of my constituents have been complaining about the roads over the last 6 months to a year. Some of the potholes haven't been filled in, haven't been dealt with. Is there anything else we should be adding this, Chair?
Thanks, Graham. Stephen, is that for you?
Thank you. If I could come back on that. Yeah, in terms of the detailed scope that was discussed with members on the 1st of September, we did talk about reviewing the processes by which we carry out particularly our reactive repairs, if we're talking about roads defects, and the kind of quality of those repairs. And we also have undertaken to look at, certainly one of the themes that was coming back also from the staff workshops, was the finite resources against what is quite a high demand in relation to the number of defects, high number of defects in the carriageways, low level of customer satisfaction, and the high road condition index value of about 48% of the road network should be considered for longer term maintenance, should be planned or should be considered for longer term maintenance. So yes, the proposal is that within the review we will capture that analysis of how we're dealing with our defect repairs and the adequacy of resources aligned to those.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Councillor Maitland next. Jane, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think, Stephen, that what I think perhaps is missing from here is the issue of flooding. The interface is not totally clear, the interface with flooding and the roads. I'm simply conscious that there was a near miss in Glen Kens last winter, as I think you'll probably know. And I'm just wondering about whether it's clear to communities how much connection you have with the flood team and what is likely to happen and the risks that might occur. That's obviously an extreme issue, but also there are problems elsewhere in the Stewartry where you get sudden torrential rain and a road is almost swept away. And I think it's known that there are particular hotspots that happens regularly. And I just wonder whether that will be part and parcel of the review that you will do. Thanks, Chairman.
Stephen?
It certainly came up in the members' workshop in terms of probably less about flooding and more about drainage and runoff from fields and how we manage that. And certainly the kind of investment in the drainage has been raised with staff in terms of we used to do a lot more in terms of preparation for our winter by looking at our verges and the drainage features in those verges. And certainly in the past we've introduced within the capital programme discrete elements for upgrading drainage on carriageways, because we know that if we have inundation of water and then kind of freeze thaw action, that we're likely to get accelerated carriageway deterioration and cracking. So that is part of the view in terms of it certainly was raised by members in terms of the drainage and the investment in the drainage. The wider issue with dealing with climate change also came up in the members' seminar. But I think it's one of those areas that some areas are difficult. We won't predict where we'll get the sudden intense rainfall, and it could be anywhere in the network at any time in the future. But it's how do we react well to that and manage it. Although we do know, as Councillor Maitland has alluded to, that there are some areas where we know when we get high flows in certain watercourses that some of the roads will be inundated, and we had incidents at the end of last year where that caused particular problems with vehicles being trapped. At those locations, we are working to make sure that appropriate signage and road closures is put in place to protect the travelling public.
Thanks, Stephen. Jane, are you content with that?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So we have Councillor David McKee and John Young. Councillor John Young. Jock?
Thanks, Chair. It's just to follow on for Councillor Bell. I don't know who the contractors are that we use to do potholes and whatnot on the road, but they seem to be very short-sighted. I know of an area where there was a strip of potholes repaired, but within inches, my French is not good enough to go in metric, within inches there are potholes, small potholes either side, and there's a large pothole maybe a couple of feet from where they've done the repair. And this is not just in this specific road, but it's all over the place, where they're only doing seem to be doing selective potholes and no looking around about to see what else is there. And as I say, I don't know whether it's our guys or whether it's contractors, but they certainly need to be sorted out for that sort of thing. Shouldn't get paid, actually.
Thanks, Jock, for that. Stephen, over to you.
Yeah, and again, this was something that came up in the members' seminar, and we discussed a bit about this in terms of the available budget for defect repairs and the kind of priorities on those. There's some elements of the network where, yes, if there are adjacent defects, we should be looking about how we make sure we have that flexibility to make those repairs while we're there on the ground, and that's more efficient. And I suppose in an ideal world, if the resource was such that we could be a bit more reactive in terms of actually going out hunting for repairs. To a certain extent, we've been doing that as we came through summer and lockdown. A lot of repairs weren't undertaken, reactive repairs, and we've kind of picked up on that with some of the jet patcher repairs where we spray emulsion and aggregate into the potholes in the road, and that's much more a kind of find it and fix it approach. Whereas I think what we're looking at is certainly we need to look at the system of how we respond to defects and adjacent defects, and what's efficient about extending that area of repair.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Jock, for that. Just before I bring it, actually apologise to you, John. It's Councillor Driver next, then yourself, then we've got Councillor Scobie after that. But we'll maybe come back to some of the kind of quality assurances and that what we need. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll leave mine to the very end. So it's you next, Archie.
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at the report, and obviously all 43 members have concerns about road defects and how we actually repair them. And elected members have to take the opportunities that are here within the scheme to get in there. Just a couple of points, please, Stephen. In the scope, at the last bullet point, you talked about expert advice, including from professional association, and actually in the actual timeline during October 2020, you've got partner facilitated discussions. Can you give me a clearer view of what that actually means?
Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, but what we're planning on doing, and certainly I've been taking forward an exercise with procurement, is bringing in a resource that knows the industry well, and to a certain extent. We're doing a lot of work internally with the project team. We're doing a lot of the baseline work and gathering of the evidence. And what I'm looking at as part of the review, and certainly want to progress, is that kind of external review of the work that we're doing leading to the recommendations. And we're looking at bringing in a resource that has national experience in terms of other roads authorities and the work that they're undertaking, and can provide that kind of benefit and added insight to the recommendations in terms of taking the road service forward.
Thanks, Chair, for letting me come back. And I hope it's no Transport Scotland, because they were one of the biggest problems that we actually had.
Thank you.
I'm not in discussions with Transport Scotland, Chair, no.
Okay, thanks for that, Stephen. So we have Councillor Young next. Sorry for that, John. I had missed Archie's there. So Councillor Young, John, you're next.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies if this is off topic, but it's something I've been considering. The scope of the roads review, the roads, as you know, was part of enterprising services, and as I was, for a short time, I was Vice Chair of Enterprise Services. And the very excellent roads report talked about the culture of the roads department. I would suggest the culture was all through enterprising services. And I wonder if at some time an investigation will be widened to include other parts of enterprising services, such as for say building maintenance or vehicles maintenance, because enterprising services provided a wide range of services, not just the roads department.
I suppose it is a wee bit off piece that, John, but I'll see if Stephen can answer maybe some of that. But I think it's maybe that's certainly a wider level investigation that was stimulated by full council. So maybe take that up with some of your colleagues. But Stephen, you can certainly have a stab at that.
I think maybe I just can respond on just one part of that, in terms of the culture. And is very much seen that one of the drivers for change, as we presented to members on the 1st of September, one of the significant drivers for change was the need to align the road service with the community's model, and the kind of embracing of better contact with the customer, better understanding of customer needs in using the road network, and the kind of customer empowerment side of things, and also the making sure that we engage with staff better to understand what the issues are on the ground. So I think in terms of I can talk to that kind of culture shift and recognise that is something that has been highlighted in terms of moving from a contracting commercial entity for part of the road service into a fully aligned with council priorities and customer needs service. And that is very much one of the key drivers for change that the road service review will deliver on. And I couldn't comment on other areas out with my own service in terms of the reviews that are going on.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think it's a worthwhile comment to be making. It may well merit further consideration by the council at some point. So, Councillor Sorry, they're still coming in. I think it's Councillor Scobie next, is that correct? Right, yep, well,
Thanks, Chair. Just a follow-up to Graham and Jock's point, and the question was asked to me, and it's in relation to the potholes, and I well remember years ago that we got a report to committee. I can't remember just what committee it was, so not many changes, but it was on the hot tar and the ability to go out and do an effective job using hot tar. And the question was asked to me just this week was, you know, it hasn't proved so successful as it was first muted, in that the tar goes cold and then we dump the tar. Now, I just asked the question if that is correct, and if we don't dump it, what do we do with it? And how effective is the hot tar system in dealing with the potholes that are continually reported to the network within the region? And again, looking at what Archie was talking about in the timelines, and we seem to be at September the 22nd, which we are, and it really is in relation to the peculiar situation that we are in terms of the stakeholders being the general public, and how we're getting to them in terms of what they think of the service and what scope needs reviewed. Because it says here that we will have a review of all the information that has been gathered so far on the 1st of October, and whether there's any, or how we do it, how we get to the general public and the stakeholders in terms of what they think of the review and what we should be doing.
Just before you do come in, and Stephen, obviously the first answer is an easy answer, I think, but I'll leave it for you to answer, it's maybe a hot box, but I will be asking, making points later on in regards to the new Roads and Streetworks Act, particular policies that the Council's put in place and how that's been applied in non-compliance, I would actually argue, as from that first-time permanent point of view. So I'll certainly come back to this point that Will has raised. But over to you, Stephen.
Yeah. In terms of effecting repairs and hot tar, use of hot tar, and again, it's something that's very much come back on going around the depots and talking to staff about some of the frustrations with the equipment that's there and the standard of the equipment, and we will include that in part of the review process in terms of we're aware there's a high number of defects on the road network. In some areas are worse than others, and we'll review the kind of funding that's available to address with reactive maintenance repairs. But we've also said to staff that we will review the equipment that we're using and the adequacy of or the number of hot boxes that we have available, because that is a good permanent repair to be made, where we cut the edges of a defect, cut back and actually seal and place hot and compact hot material, and that's an expensive repair, but it's something that is long lasting. So that the options open to us in terms of responding to defect repairs, we will consider as part of the review, and any sort of additional resources that we need to allocate to those, so that we're actually getting on top of the number of defect repairs, because we do spend quite a lot of time, and the public spend quite a lot of time reporting those defects. If we could get that base number down in terms of the carriageway condition, we can maybe achieve a more manageable turnover of reactive repairs, but it's something that we need to look at probably a higher resource on in the near future. In terms of how we will contact the public, and we're looking at that kind of wider stakeholder engagement through October, as well as kind of building on the staff focus groups that we've got. We're looking at a webinar that will involve the public, and we're taking advice from communities in terms of the specialism there on kind of stakeholder and community consultation. We'll take advice there, but we're looking at probably a digital survey in terms of probably seeing if we can use the contacts that we've already, obviously get quite a high number of contacts through the website, through the Report-It system, and looking at the ability for us to be able to use those contact details to flag up the online survey of people that are obviously have an interest in the road network and have been reporting issues to us. And we're also looking at an online webinar with the public and the best kind of community groups to access, to make sure that we're capturing that public feedback, just to build on what members have told us and what staff have told us.
Okay with that, thank you. Thanks so much, Stephen, for that. So we have Councillor Stitt, then Thompson, then I'll maybe...
Cheers, Chair. Just to follow up on Councillor Maitland's about flooding. It's not only main roads that's got a great concern about flooding, it's in your towns as well, because you're not, I know it's down to cutbacks and everything, Stephen, but even my hometown, some of the drains are full of silt and grass growing out of them, and if you've got housing schemes that are built in hills, when you've got heavy rain, the drains can't take them and they're flooding the roads in the town, and it's causing traffic problems. As I say before, I know the cutbacks that we've had, but years ago when we had the money, drains are cleared on a regular basis, and it just causes, and most of the flooding is at road junctions.
Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of new developments and adding to the kind of capacity in an urban and a town network, all new developments for a number of years now in terms of development control have had to manage the runoff on hard areas within the new sites in a way that replicates what the greenfield runoff would have been before. So that's probably less of an issue now that we have good kind of development control linked into planning processes and road adoption processes. In terms of the gully clearance, and again, it has come up with staff, their concerns in the past that we used to fund gullies being cleared twice a year on a cyclical basis, cyclical maintenance basis. And at the present time now, we're actually within the budget in terms of the reductions we've made. We're only funding when problems are reported at particular locations to go in and to clear gullies.
Thanks, Stephen. Aye, thanks for that, Davy. So I'll just pick you back on the back of both Councillor Stitt and Councillor Maitland's point there. So it's in a seminar it was spoken about proactive maintenance, but preventative maintenance is a kind of normal term, I think, for that. So that's where this drainage, stroke gullies, stroke that type of stuff, even potholes, I think. I need my speaker on. I thought I could hear feedback there, sorry. So, Stephen, will this review, the scope of this review, is it wide enough so it makes sure it will cover up? Okay, there'll be an honest appraisal that comes forward and says, this is how much money we need to spend as a council. So we may be spending $1 million, but we need to spend $1.5 million, $2 million, whatever the realistic figure is in order to meet the aspirations of the members and probably most of the wider public.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that would be my intention in the review. And that would certainly be consistent with recommendations from Audit Scotland in a number of reports that they've created on how road services are managed in terms of making sure that we're fully aware of the maintenance need and that is evaluated for members when they're making investment decisions.
Thank you. Thanks for that reassurance. Councillor Thompson, you're next. Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm encouraged by what Stephen Herritt's just said there, because obviously we have to take account of the maintenance of the assets that we're looking after. I'm looking at the list of the sort of breakdown on page 171 of the structure, the interim management structure of the road service functions. Now, in the box at the bottom, it sort of lists sort of like all the functions, if you like, and I'm conscious that some of those might actually require a dedicated team if we're going to be serious about all year round delivery of a particular aspect of that service. So whereas I think at the moment, or at least historically, there's certainly been sort of members of staff might have been pulled from one project or line of work to the other as the seasons or the weather dictates. So and that flexibility comes at a cost, because sometimes you maybe only clean a gully once a year instead of twice a year, and that in turn creates other problems. So I think understanding that a bit better might be helpful. I'm also thinking of a tourist coming to the region, for example, driving along a road thinking, oh, that's great, the road's patched, but then they can't see the sign for the turn off to their tourist destination, and then they clatter into a tree because it's an overhanging branch. So none of those are sort of tarmac Adam, but they are part of the whole road experience, if you like. And I think especially in rural areas, there's often concerns about, well, who's looking after the verges of the overgrowth, and I can't see the sign, and where's the lights, you know, all the different road safety features and navigation features. So there's maybe something about that to be looked at there as well in the scope. But maybe that combines with neighbourhood services, for example, in terms of the coordination with other council services. The only other thing I'd sort of say in terms of the scope would be, how do we tie this into the likes of, you mentioned, you know, planning development, but there's an element there about, is there some scope to look at developer contributions for certain sizes of development where we know there'll be an impact on a road junction or increased traffic or road safety issues, how does that get tied in? Because it's not something we tend to do a lot, although it's certainly a concern that the people who already live in an area often raise, well, how's that going to contribute? Because it means when we adopt it, we have to look after it. And similarly, the fees and charges aspect of, say, for example, road closures or parking even, but whatever it is it might be, unless these are fully in our control, and I know that this council likes to be in control of the things it looks after, so it would make sense to look at how we decriminalise to be in full control of what we choose to do with parking to discourage unnecessary traffic, or control it better without having to rely on a police service that doesn't always prioritise it the way we want it to. And similarly, road closures for a farmer's market might not want to be attracting the same level of fee as a sort of road closure for scaffolding or utility work. So I think there's a tie-in with our fees and charges as well, which could generate income or concessions to community groups, for example. So it's maybe just to put those on in the detail of the scope, I would suggest, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. And over to you, Stephen. Just to...
Thanks, Chair. Just come back on a number of these points. Yes, needing to understand the level of operational staff that we have and what can be delivered is part of that kind of resource equation in terms of budget available and staff availability. And we've had decreasing numbers of staff over the years, and part of that has been the moving away from providing services commercially out with the local road network to more of a focus on what's the council's asset. But there have been changes in staff numbers, and yes, that needs to be factored in. I think in terms of the roads and infrastructure service, we've got a longer term project in terms of transformation to look at all our operational staff, so that's across waste and roads and community assets, and look at when there are kind of peaks and troughs in demand across those services, and look at in the future trying to move towards a more flexible kind of workforce in terms of the scope of the roles that they can undertake, and that's something that will be factored into a separate project, but very much the development transformation of the road service needs to keep that in mind. We already work across those services, but it's just actually making the situation, making it easier to move staff about where demand is required. Poor signs, trees and verges. Yep, the kind of maintenance of some of the roadside features, again, has probably decreased over the years, but these issues tend to be picked up in our safety inspections, and our safety inspection process is part of in scope for the review to make sure that we're consistent with the current version of the Code of Practice and the guidance on carrying out the safety inspections on the road network. Tying into planning and development, I think that's very much a role for our team leader, or for the roads planning team, and obviously they work very closely with planning service colleagues, and certainly would input any sort of ideas that they have on changes to developer contributions, and we're probably best placed to kind of understand what the markets can sustain there, and provide advice on that we can assist them with in terms of valuing off-site infrastructure for large developments. Fees and charges is very much something we're kind of tied into on an annual basis in terms of the review process, and that tends to sit looking at across the whole council in terms of fees and charges, and we do feed into that just to see where we can maximise those fees and charges without damaging the kind of level of income if people choose not to use the services that we're raise fees for. Parking has certainly been discussed in terms of the feedback from members, and I would think we need to consider further that that's probably the answer to the parking question is probably a separate project at this time, and probably not part of the road service review, which is very much about setting up the road service for the services that we're delivering. And I think in the future, if we look at decriminalised parking enforcement, and it's certainly something that's been discussed with political groups and in committee meetings, if that's a project that we're looking to progress, I would advocate that that's a standalone project and warrants a discrete project management and a project team to look at the strategy for parking, but also the kind of wider question of how we look at enforcement on street.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Councillor Thompson, getting the nod saying he's okay with that. No other people wanting any questions. So, Stephen, I'll make a couple of points. Maybe you could respond to them. It's assurances that I'm looking for, in particular, in regards to the scope. So, I think you were probably the report author. Correct me if I'm wrong. Go back 2012, I think it was March, April time, when we had a report to the Plan, Housing and Environment Services Committee at the time, and it was just before the election. And it was about the first time permanent policy. So that aligned itself to the methodologies being applied through the new Roads and Streetworks Act 1991, which I think you're aware of. So going back to what you stated earlier, if you're fixing a pothole, you turn up, well, I'm being a wee bit detailed here, but I have to be, just so everybody's clear. You turn up to the road, you put your sign in, you sign, you'd guard, make everything safe, you'd have your hot material turn up. Before you got that, you'd prep your job, so you'd use your still saw, you'd cut out the hole, you cut out the defect, you'd prepare that, so you'd either sub-base it, pitch line it, whatever you're going to do, then you'd apply your hot materials and you'd come away at a finalised repair, which would be long lasting. So that's not been getting complied with through what I can say. I've looked back and I can't see it unless it's otherwise that's been done away with that policy. I think if it's a policy of the council that was made at that point, and the only time we remember discussing at the time was that the exception would be, say there was an emergency, say a great big hole applied, a pothole in Gretna for instance, and it was a highly trafficked because of the volume of people that turned up because of the weddings and such like. Okay, you turn up, you fill it full of deferred set or cold tar as a 2 or 3 day repair, then you come back with a hot tar and fill it, make a permanent repair. Well, that's non-compliance, and I could take you to 3 or 4, if you've got a spare half day, 300 or 400 potholes, certainly in Annandale and Estill, where there's been non-compliance just over the summer, the summertime here. So this scope of the review, so if a policy has been made at council, the council makes policies and there's non-compliance, well, let's look at that, and that's really about quality assurance in particular. So I can take to a number of policies, like I've said, and I don't think they meet the level of quality assurance. So if we are bringing in private contractors to do that, they've got to demonstrate the quality assurance, whether it's taking photographs or the type of materials or records, what they're using, taking the temperatures, the times of dates, and all the rest of it. So this is just in regards to, I'm only picking up on the roads defects in particular. But it does go forward into whether it's drainage, hedge cutting, all these other different things, signage cleaning, all that type of stuff. So it's whether this review, the scope is wide enough to pick up on that, Stephen. So I'm looking for assurances in regards that it is, or if it isn't, then I would like that to be added so it does pick up on that. So I've got some questions here. I think a number have been touched on, and I'm trying to keep them as general and as strategic as I can. So I've also described how this review will demonstrate to us we're getting best value for money. And a reason I've wrote that one, I'll finish on that one in particular. So during the full council meeting, there was a number of breaks when this was all agreed. I think it was in June time. It was agreed that okay, we'd come back and have this investigation, and from that we'd have a root and branch review in regards to the roads and how we can take it forward. It was about best value, how we'd get our potholes filled in the best way, our hedges cut in the best way, our grass cut, our drainage done, all this service. How would we get best value for money? So I suppose is the scope wide enough, and will findings that come back describe this? Maybe it comes back to the points we made already. Have we got to pay for a gold standard, a silver or a bronze, or is it even copper, lead or steel? I don't know. It will depend on the amount of money that will come in. It needs to be important that you're very honest with us and say, listen, if you're wanting this gold-plated standard of road service delivery, this is how much it will cost. We've seen these figures in the past, you have presented to them, but I think it's important that as a council we do see this and we can make those decisions, because we can sit here and grumble as much as we want about how potholes aren't getting filled in the right way, but if we're not applying the right level of resources as a council, then the finger has to point back at us. So you have to be honest with that, Stephen. Thanks very much for listening to that.
Thanks. If I can just come back on that, Chair, that you want me to respond to that, thank you. No, I'm grateful that you're asking me just to be clear on that in terms of providing that information to elected members. And as I said before, that's kind of compliant with advice from Audit Scotland on making sure that elected members are aware of the kind of investment that's required on our assets. In terms of best value, I would propose, I mean, we're working with a service, we've said to members about 100 plus staff. We've given an indicative structure in terms of what we're currently running to with the merge of the services over the last year and a half. That's basically what we're working with, and we will advise on if there's resource changes, what different services can be delivered, particularly in relation to managing the carriageway and maintenance, and what the public see on using the road. The report, we will review what has been said in the past about first-time permanent and repairs. And that there's maybe a couple of things there. You referenced the New Roads and Street Works Act, and again, that's where we're doing significant works in the road and the specification and compliance with the specification. But I think what we're alluding to is the previous committee decision, and I would need to check if it was enterprising committee in the past talked about the first-time permanent. But we will review what has been said in the past and look at the reasons why. And there are some valid reasons why temporary repairs are made where safety is a priority, but I think we need to be careful and make sure that we're not getting into the situation that temporary repairs are being made because of lack of resources to be able to fund permanent repairs. And again, that's something that needs to be brought through the review process.
No, thanks for that response, Stephen. I think it looks like Councillor Cairncross just come into the meeting and your mic's on, for the looks of it, if you can hear that. Stephen, no, it's about non-compliance, so you turn up with hot material, it's rolled in, it's actually, to a degree it lasts, but it's no cutting out, you're not taking, digging down to a required depth, so the depth of material is inadequate. They will last, they're superficial, they'll be out by the end of the summer, which is unfortunate, but I know the men are doing the best they can with the resources that they've actually got, so the council need to take a proper inward look at themselves and resource it adequately. But I think as long as it's covered within the scope of the review, I think that it's absolutely fine. You will come back with that honest opinion. So, as far as the recommendations are concerned, I don't think I've got anybody else looking to come in. I don't. So, to ask her, we've been asked at 2.1 to consider the scope and review methodology for the review of the roads service. I think we've done that, we've considered that, and 2.2 is agree any enhancements required to the scope and methodology of the roads service review appendix, as per appendix 2 to be considered by the Communities Committee. I think if you could send us out an action list, Stephen, of what you've picked up on to the members within the Audit Risk Scrutiny, because I know a number of members, you've taken a lot of notes, and when we see that, we could either come back to that, if you can do that through Liz, if that's okay. Yep, excellent. Liz?
If it would be helpful just to clarify my understanding about perhaps for the workshop, which I think is now the beginning of November rather than the end of October, just with your busy calendars, that there's 4 particular areas to develop at that workshop. One is about preventative work around flooding and drainage particularly. The second issue is about understanding the deployment of staff and how you're using them. External funding or income, perhaps particularly around developer contributions and fees and charges, and then how the quality assurance is carried out. And as an operational action, we'll pick up the point about the culture change for wider parts of the former enterprising services. My understanding is I think that the transformation programme is going to be doing a council-wide culture change programme, so it may well already be part of that, but we'll certainly pick that up with the managers.
Councillor Ryber, then bring you in, Stephen. I just want to say something.
Thanks, Chair. Just coming back to the first-time fix committee. It was I remember it well. It was actually in Buccleuch Street, and it was DG First Subcommittee, I think it was. But it was certainly in Buccleuch Street in 2013-14, something like that. So that maybe helps Stephen with that side of things.
It was March or April 2012, I think you're right, I'm saying it's Plan House and Environment, I think it was DG First Committee, and it was a full committee at that time when they run separate to each other, didn't they? It was a commission and delivery type, so it was March, it was just before the 2012 election, that's why it sticks in my mind so much, Stephen, so, but Archie's probably right, I think he absolutely is, it was DG First Management Committee, I think it was described as it at the time. No, so I think, Stephen, you were wanting to pop back in, I think you had your hand up, and if you've got anything to add, then I'll just open up to the last for members. I think Liz summed it up very well. Stephen?
Thanks, yes. It was just to say that we're in the report to Communities Committee on the 1st of October. I was just going to include some of the feedback, just capture some of the feedback from Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee. But once we've drafted that out, I'll share that for distribution with the Audit, Risk and Scrutiny Committee.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks so much for that. I think the committee's content with that. I don't see anything online, and there's nodding heads within the room. Thanks very much for that, for your time, Stephen. Thank you. It's well presented. Item number 6 we're heading on to now, which is on page 175, I see. So, progress is about progress in the follow-up actions arising from the 4th generation trunk road contract investigation. I don't know who's, within my notes, I'm not sure. Is it yourself, Liz? Okay, so Liz has got to speak to this. So if you give your presentation, Liz, and Graham's wanting it first.
Thank you. Nothing really to add to the report. It's a factual position about where we are with the 4 different elements that came out of the Trunk Road investigation. Particularly, there will be issues perhaps that are relevant to come to this committee in the future, depending on the outcome of the further inquiry work, the 2 reviews and further scrutiny arrangements. But at the moment, this is a factual position just to advise you of where we are. Thank you.
Thanks. Graham, you're first. Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Chair. It's maybe a question for Liz on that. Obviously, looking at 3.2, how much has the KPMG been paid for this service as part of work as well? Also, what sort of progress has been made in that? Have members got to wait till the full council in December 2020? Just wonder what sort of progress has been made at present and the KPMG costs.
I'm afraid I don't have that detail, but my understanding is that they certainly are working. The Integrity Group is up and running with the new chair, and as soon as they have something to report, then they would be bringing it to the appropriate body. So it might not necessarily need to be full council. It will depend on what the outcome of their investigation is. It may be this committee, it may be other committees.
So, Chair, can Liz maybe find out for the members of the committee how much that the fee is costing for KPMG? But it's interesting because they do a lot of work within the council, and so does Grant and Thornton, and they have an annual audit fee for Dumfries and Galloway Council. Just wonder what it would cost, what the indication for this piece of work is going to cost the council.
Can certainly arrange for a briefing to come out to members just to give you an update on the KPMG work.
Okay, so just be specific, because I'll add to that, because I had another point as well. It's on about the independent chair. So I've looked for the costs. It's costing the council for the independent chair as well as KPMG. So the briefing should include both costs as well, please, Liz, just for absolute assurance. So I think it would need to be understand what that is. So do we have MD on line? I think we have, Councillor Hagman, you're next. Katie, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a sort of a brief update just to confirm to the committee that certainly myself and Councillor Wilson, as Chair and Vice Chair of the FPT Committee, have been having regular meetings with Peter Lewis, who is the interim Chair, and he has been meeting with KPMG. In terms of the costs, I don't have that information, but clearly that may be a sensitive exempt item just for commercial sensitivities, but I'm sure Liz is taking forward that action, so she'll be able to come back to you. However, just to confirm that it was agreed that there'll be a future report coming, or an interim report coming to FPT at the next committee. So I would advise that even if you don't sit on that committee, you should still be able to access the reports, and that should give you an interim update of what the scope of work is doing and where they are at in terms of any investigations and findings, preliminary findings from KPMG that can be reported on at that point. So I would just advise members to keep an eye on the FPT committee papers when they come out for our next committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that update, Katie. Much appreciated. So we will get other bites at the cherry. So, but just before I go on to the next person, which is Councillor Young, are the report authors here to speak to this at all? Are they online? No, not at all. Right, okay. Councillor John Young. John, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. I was just merely going to ask for a wee bit of background in the 2 temporary posts. I imagine there have to be quite a detailed level of knowledge for these posts, and I wonder if there'll be external posts are filled internally from the council.
Is this the scrutiny posts to support this committee and the scrutiny reviews? No, they will be internal posts.
Right, so just for clarity, so that will be filled internally through. Yeah, that's what I kind of thought. Good. Okay, John, I see your mic's went off, so you're quite happy with that. Councillor Maitland.
All I can say is that looking to conclude 3 steps on page 176, we've got a clear commitment to office members and arrangements, but also to get to the root of why it could happen. I think, was one of the things that we were really looking at. So I'd like to be sure that that is actually going to be covered. Thanks.
I didn't really pick all that question up there, John. So
I think what you're
Liz.
referring to, I presume, is the FPT, the Internal Financial Procedures and Procurement Standing Orders Review. And certainly I think the scope that was agreed by full council and the level of work that is going on, I think members could have that assurance that there will be that analysis and findings for you to consider.
Forgive me, Chairman, actually that's not what I meant. I meant quite clearly with the roads investigation is to know why we were able to have a group of officers who clearly managed to create this problem for the council. And that's what I'm interested in as far as the trunk roads investigation is concerned. So yes, I can see why that's going to overlap with the financial investigation, but nevertheless, we also need to understand why it was that it was possible for a group of officers to really go completely off-piste in the way it appears that they did. And I want that to come through. I think all members want that to come through.
Liz, do you want to answer that?
I think that the work which full council agreed that is to be done arising from the trunk roads maintenance contract is designed to elicit any information that you would need to analyse why the contract arrangements happened the way they did. So between the further inquiry work, the arrangements of the integrity group, the FPT review and the road service review, they are designed collectively to give you that information.
Thanks. I see we've got Jane's content with that answer. She's saying fine. Liz, I've got any other speakers at this moment in time, but I have to be honest, I don't think your hand was up, was it? No, it wasn't actually. I was completely underwhelmed when this came. That's why I asked if the report authors were here, only because it was so little content compared to what I thought I was going to see. We were actually at a workshop last week. We were told that, so we've got an expertise, we've hired it in, and that's why the questions asked around about how much did the cost KPMG, because we were told at a workshop last week that actually internal people could have done this. No, there's different opinions in regards to whether that should or should not have happened for the sake of being impartial, but still that could have happened because we were told that we didn't have that expertise. So there's a contrary statement last week. I don't know if we'll get to the bottom of that today or not, but it's certainly a point worth a raising, I think. I looked at page 257, which is away, the very last page, and it's our checklist, Liz, in regards to this. You've got to bullet point 7, and it says, do officers provide committee members with timely, well-written and useful reports? This didn't do it for me, this particular report, and it's because of my expectations of what was coming. I was, have to admit, I'm quite underwhelmed in regards to just what we've got here. I expected to see much more meat in the bones. And when it comes to recommendations, members are asked to note the good progress in implementing the actions. I just wondered, if you can add, because you're not the report author, obviously, but can you tell us why we should be agreeing that this is good? I don't see it as being good up to now, because I've not got a level of detail that I would have required. Maybe it should have been in private, I don't know.
Certainly you'll appreciate that what full council agreed on the 30th of July is a number of programmes of work. And I think the timing of your committee is clearly these, I think what we're asking you to agree today is that all of these programmes of work are now up and running. So you know that that is in development. But clearly we don't have the findings of any of these pieces of work at the moment, but you can be assured, because you're all involved, that they are all in train and they're all up and running, they're being implemented. And so the findings will come out over the coming weeks and months.
I'll bring in an answer. It's a little bit later on in a further report. I just picked up on one of the internal auditors' comment in regards to, he's saying that there's no corruption or fraudulent activity being picked up at this point in time in regards to this investigation which is underway. So to me that's information, it's in the public domain, and we could have received that type of information if that's the case, but that was at that point in time. I think it dates back to August time at some point. So I just think, like, again, I've maybe harped on a bit enough, especially as chair, but I was disappointed to say the least. I don't think it met the test that we should be applying at page 257, bullet point 7. just a lack of information, and even if we had to take it as an exec item to get right into the detail, I think we should have that chance. Then with that level of information, we'd be able to comment properly in regards to what our thoughts are in regards to progress. I don't know I can actually approve the good progress as it stands. Archie?
Chair, I'm just wondering if you've had a pre-meeting, because this could have been pulled for another Audit and Risk Committee. If you weren't happy with it, did you not, as part of the process, have a pre-meeting with the officers on this?
I think that's absolutely irrelevant, Archie, whether they did or not. I don't know. I mean, I understand you're saying, okay, there's a degree of control over this. I think if you note, our next meeting is December. So if we pulled it, it would have probably just before, I think, full council. It's probably not worth getting into that argument here at the moment. Other than we did have a pre-meeting, but this particular point wasn't discussed. And I'm making my point clear today in public. I'm disappointed with this, and it's why I would rather the report office here to speak to it. I don't think it complies with our checklist. But anyways, I'll leave it at that. So what we're being asked to do, Willie?
Yeah, Chair, I think there was a great deal of discussion at the meeting at the bridge. I think that was about the June the 30th, if memory serves me correctly, on where this should go in terms of the investigation. And I think it was your own point that Audit and Risk should be leading on it, and whether that, this is what we get back. And I think, we need a fuller note just to wait till the end, and then you get a report presented. I think we need to know process and what's coming out of the process in that. I'm just reading on my phone there, and if you indulge me, Chair, it refers back to the previous report from our internal auditors, and this is an MSP asking for an investigation into the waste management, and yet here we've got an investigation going on, and yet, as you're saying from the chair, you're not happy with the report, and I don't think any of us could be happy. There's nothing in the report of any substance that could say how the investigation is ongoing, other than to tell us people have been appointed, but no cost against that appointment, which is something that will come out of the public purse anyway. So the substance of this, and relating that back to a previous, when I did say that we should have an investigation, it's public perception, whether we as members are in control of this, or whether it's being controlled from officers. And I think that's where we as Audit and Risk should be looking at this, and whether we are satisfied that it is being properly conducted, that we are getting feedback on it as members and kept up to speed. So to Archie's point, to pull the report, wouldn't have done anything in terms of audit and whether we should be involved as Audit and Risk in this whole process. And that brings back to the very question you asked on the 30th of June, which again comes back to another motion that was tabled in that day, whether it should be a police investigation. I know you've said that there's reference somewhere to that there's no fraud at this stage.
That was Early Doors. No, thanks for your comments. I put presented my case at the time. I lost that particular case, and we are where we are in regards to how it's moving forward. But it's a level of disappointment. I thought I would receive more information. Maybe I should have took a stronger hold of it. Actually, maybe you're correct to that. So we'll leave that until the end, because we want KPMG here. I would have wanted Peter Lewis here as well as the independent chair. We want a number of things here to speak to this that obviously hasn't actually happened or appeared. Katie, you're wanting in. Councillor Hagman.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I said at the start of this, FPT are in the process of a series of 5 workshops, and certainly the Chunks Road maintenance contract and the roads review is sitting under communities. Now, I am aware that we're in the middle of this investigation, so at this point I don't think it would be appropriate to be publishing findings as such. However, I appreciate what you're saying, that there isn't a lot in this report before us today, and I'm just wondering whether it would have been more helpful and whether that would help members if we had succinct timeline with dates, because actually there's been a lot of engagement done with members. There's been a lot of workshops. I believe that the Integrity 2 group have just met the once, but there is support being offered to the Director of Communities via that interim independent chair. But whether it be useful to have a timeline of dates to reassure members of the committee that this is an ongoing piece of work, these are the dates and actions that have happened, and this is what is still to happen. As I say, we're in the middle of this investigation, and this is to update members of this committee of the progress. So I don't know whether that would be useful, and certainly whether that's something that you would like to request. I don't think that would be unreasonable, because there has been a lot of work done, but it's maybe not reflected correctly in this report, and whether just a timeline of dates of what has been done would be helpful. I'll put it to you, Chair, to see if you wish to take that forward.
Thanks, Kate. I think you've been very kind in regards to the report, which is fair enough. But I think what I'll do is I'm just looking at Councillor Maitland's comments. So she finds herself in complete agreement with Councillor Scobie, who's saying this matter of whether this report should have come to the committee. It's for all members to be able to see what level of information we as members are being offered. So Jane, it's all members, the 43 members of the council, not just audit, risk, scrutiny, not just finance, procurement, transformation. We are accountable to electorate. We are the council. We can access all information that the council has. So Councillor Wilson and Councillor Hagman are privy to, at this moment in time, to more information that we, as what we've actually got in this room. That then puts us at a disadvantage. Yeah, fair enough, it will come to us at some point, Katie. I take on your point, but what I'll do is I'll pick this up with Councillor Maitland as the Vice Chair. We'll discuss this further, and we'll make all a special meeting audit risk and scrutiny and look at this again as an exempt item. But we'll take advice and we'll consider this through this. So, Katie, certainly come back.
If I can come back, Chair, what I would reiterate is I've not had any information back as to any discussions of the Integrity Group. I know that they have met, but I've not actually had any reports back on that. So at this point, certainly from that point of view, I'm not privy to any extra information that other members have been taken, other than to know that that work stream is going ahead, which all members are aware of. Thank you.
That's great. It was only just when he said that there was far more work had been carried out as it was within the actual report. From what I can see within the report is my basic knowledge. So, anyways, we'll move to the recommendations. I would just ask that, I don't think we have any further speakers, and as an action for myself, I'll pick up with the Vice Chair after the meeting. But I think we've been asked to note, I would say that we note the actions arising from the 4th Generation Trunk Roads contract investigation as agreed by Dumfries Galloway Council. And rather than show disappointment, I think I'll take that as an action. We may well revisit this, subject to a special meeting for audit risk and scrutiny, just depending. If we're okay with that? Yeah, okay, right, okay.
Certainly, as an action, we'll arrange for a briefing note to come out to all members.
And that'll have the cost of KPMG and our independent chair in it. Thank you, thanks very much for that. Thanks very much, members. Item number 7, internal audit reports issued. So, again, sorry, is it Kevin? I think I'll be speaking to this. Kevin, I think you'll be on the line. It'll be yourself or Richard. Is it Richard? Okay, Richard. Richard Fox, it's yourself. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to add to the report, but I'm happy to take any questions on any of the reports that you've got before you.
Okay, thanks so much, Richard. Members, I'll open it up to yourselves physically within the room. I don't see any hands up as of yet. So, Archie, Councillor Driver.
Thanks very much, Chairman Richard. I'm just looking at the recommendations. Are you happy that these recommendations will actually improve the situation on each of these reports?
I wonder if what we normally do, we've got Councillor coming as well, but actually what we normally do is go through each report as it wants. So you're looking on block here, but I think there's some things in here maybe individually could pick up on. And if we want to just cover one as a simple question like that, we could. So if we're looking at Appendix 1, that's on the main financial systems report, payables to settle creditors. So if we could apply that, Archie, you okay, apply that question to that one? Richard?
Thank you, Chair. I've had a discussion with the manager recently regarding this report, and I'm satisfied that progress has been made with each of those actions. I'm also aware that they've put in process some e-forms and workflow processes to address some of the other weaknesses. So yes, I am satisfied in this case. Thank you.
Satisfied with that answer, actually. So I suppose it's page 186 then, before I've got Councillor Young to come in as well, but page 186, just in regards to the recommendations, so you've got your 1, 2, year 3, it's the language, and this is another one, it's maybe the correct language, but you can just inform me, please, Richard, if you don't mind. Finance and procurement services should. It says certain procurement procedures should, and finance and procurement services should in all three boxes. It starts off that. Should that be should or should that be will? I just wondered, maybe it is the correct language, but I just thought, should we be more assertive in regards to that?
Thank you, Chair. When we say should, we're advising management as to what practices we think they should put in place. It's up to management as to what they actually do.
Okay, I think we'll pick up on that conversation later on. Now, we have Lindsay Wilson want to come in as well. So, Lindsay, is it on the same point?
Yeah, yes, Chair. Just to give reassurance to the committee that all those three recommendations have been looked at, reviewed and addressed. So just in line with what Richard was saying, I can give you the assurance that they're all sorted now.
Okay, thanks very much for that. That's appreciated. Councillor Young. John, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. You actually asked the question I was going to ask about the language in the recommendations, but I would highlight that the practices listed on page 183 show really sloppy behaviours within that particular department.
Thanks, John. I apologise for that. I just hadn't seen there was no names up when I started the question. I normally leave mine's right to end if I possibly can in case they're covered. Councillor Johnston. Malcolm, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I quite enjoyed reading through this report here, and it highlighted a number of difficulties with us. Now, what concerns me with you came up with recommendations. You've got assurance that something's been done, but quite often, what we're actually addressing here is non-compliance with existing policies and procedures. So, what has been put in place to monitor that these actions are going to continue to be taken, or is it just going to be, we're going to do it, we'll do it for a few months, they'll never come back to this, we'll just forget about it. So how have we set up a system whereby we can monitor that people are complying?
Thanks, Malcolm. Is that for yourself, Richard? I see your hands up again, Lindsay. So between the two of you, decide who's coming in.
I'll Richard, if you wish. The first recommendation was the 3-month form review of the purchase ledger module and the authorisation. So what we've done there is we've basically carried out a review of authorisation sort of levels, and especially the level of authorisation linked to the sort of staff grade or the budget responsibility held by the officer. So we've been lucky because with the purchase to pay project, a lot of the issues that internal audit raised, they were actually being addressed or have been addressed as a consequence of the purchase to pay. I'm sure members will be aware we've introduced a new module called Integra Resourcing Supply System, which is an ordering and invoicing system on our mainstream Integra system. And it requires an authorisation hierarchy and authorisation levels to be set. And these are very up to date. So what we're in the process of doing is mirroring this RSS hierarchy across the purchase ledger team hierarchy. And as part of the exercise, we've refreshed the list of users, also in conjunction with our colleagues in accountancy, because it obviously has to cover the nominal ledger and also has to cover the sales ledger as well. So in terms of that recommendation, we've carried out the review into the authorisation. The second recommendation was interfaces. Again, I'll give the members the reassurance that this recommendation has been actioned. As a consequence of moving into lockdown and working from home, the purchase ledger team have moved their entire process from a paper-based to an electronic system. Therefore, all the interface documents are now worked on and saved electronically and are subsequently reconciled by a manager as part of the control process, and it's usually myself. If there are any omissions to that, then they're thrown up by the management reconciliation and sort of rectified. So we've done, in a sense, done that one. And the last recommendation was the PCOS files. Just to give this a bit more context, the reason the PCOS files were amended by the purchase ledger team was that the PCOS is actually part of the billing, ordering and payments team, and sat a desk away from the purchase ledger team pre-lockdown. So if any amendments were done, we did them in conjunction with the PCOS team. Secondly, to correct the PCOS error, we'd have to return that particular file to Leidos, the company looking after the PCOS software, and this would take time to be corrected, so leading delays with payments to suppliers. So that was our justification for doing it. But said that, following audit recommendation, we've now we've basically stopped any file amendments, but we have again been advantaged by the fact that the Integra RSS system now effectively has replaced PCOS, and we're actually in the process of actually running down the PCOS system. For example, no orders have been raised in PCOS since the 1st of April 2020, and all we're really doing now is processing, which are effectively historical orders and invoices. So we've actually complied with that particular recommendation. So hopefully I've given you the committee reassurance that we've looked at it, we've addressed it, and we've kind of sense sorted it. So hopefully that answers you any concerns that members might have in terms of any issues raised by this report.
I'll just give Richard a chance to come in first. I'll give Richard a chance to come in first to make further comment if required, then bring you back in, Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair, but I have nothing to add to what Lindsay was saying at the moment.
Okay, Malcolm, will you want back in?
It was just really to say, I mean, the situation may be sorted now. The kind of route of travel I was going down, and that should there not be some form of KPI introduced, you know, to verify that a certain number, the service themselves has done some form of check to make sure procedures are being followed, because this seems to be a recurring theme with a lot of problems that we get, that procedures have been in place. Your audit's highlighted a lot of problems, and it's pointed out exactly what should be done, which is absolutely terrific. It's just how we make sure we keep doing them.
May I come in, Chair?
Please, Richard. Yep.
For a couple of the areas I think we're referring to, which is changes to supplier details and also to urgent payments, we're actually putting in place new procedures with workflow and processes which by themselves actually provide for better management control of what has not been authorised. Unfortunately, these processes haven't been in place long enough for us to audit as yet, so I can't provide the assurance that I think the committee are after at this moment. But that's hopefully where we're going.
I see your head's nodding, Malcolm. So maybe a KPI could be something, or the likes could be something we pick up at a later point in time. Are you satisfied with the answer at this moment in time? I take your screen going off as being a yes. Thanks, Malcolm. So we've covered appendix number 1. We're okay with that?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Appendix number 2. Lindsay, was that your hand going back up again? Sorry. No. Lindsay's hands doing that. Okay. So appendix number 2, internal audit, main financial systems report, capital budgeting. I'll open it up to members first. Jane, I think you've got your hand up, have you? Councillor Maitland.
Yes, Ian. Thanks. On page 193, risk management, paragraph 3.25. I see that internal audit will work with relevant officers to address the issue that has been mentioned there. Does this need to be an extra recommendation for us to check in 6 months that that has occurred. I'd just like to suggest that that might be something we might like to add in. And the other issue that I wanted to ask about is about, I've lost it. I know, 3.13, paragraph 3.13, which is just about us having sufficient information in front of us about what projects and individual class programs, works programs cost. And there's a suggestion there that we might like to have a more detailed program and information about when we make decisions, because everything comes out in the wash in the bigger numbers. But I think it might be quite useful to have the information in front of us when we're actually making decisions on the smaller programs. I leave that with you, Chairman, to think about, but I'm inclined to think that we might have a couple more recommendations in there.
Thanks, Jane, for that. I picked up on the two same points. I think Councillor Campbell picked up earlier in regards to the level of scrutiny and information that we have and input we have into particular decisions. So I agree entirely with your sentiments, and if you want, we can pick up on that as we go through this. But Richard, do you want to come back and reply to Councillor Maitland?
No, thank you, Chair. I think both those points are very validly for the committee itself.
Okay, Jane, you might be the only speaker on this, I think. But it looks at 2 points I've picked up on. 325, well, there's one other small one, but it's really... Councillor Thompson?
I didn't know if it would be quicker to wave at you or type something into MS Teams there. Thank you. It was actually on a similar point. It was just on the where it introduces that in terms of the flood protection schemes at 3.6 on page 190. And this ties in perhaps maybe to members who've attended some of the, the procurement type workshops we've been attending. It's just really to do with this clarifying the scope before we go to procurement. This seems to be something we kind of do on the fly a little bit, or I don't know if it's the chicken and egg sort of situation. How do you know how much something costs unless you ask somebody? But how can you ask somebody if you don't know what it is you want to do? So, so it's maybe just a bit about the flood programmes, and this is just an example, because obviously there's a commitment to deliver these, but at the same time, are we clear in fact what it is we're intending delivering? Because that seems to be what 3.6 is saying, and maybe that ties into Councillor Maitland's point about the recommendation. So it was really just to add to that, I think, maybe take it in that direction.
Thanks for that, Stephen. I read that 3.6 a number of times just to get into my head what exactly was being applied. I think we've mentioned it so many times in committee as well, the correlation between what we're spending, the actual value. The White Sands is an easy example because it will have escalated in price. Is it shovel ready though? Or you could look at the other flood schemes as well, but I think it's easy because we do think that one's probably went up exponentially because of particular cost, but it's absolutely right. So I wonder if we just go to is there anything that either Stephen or Jane wants to add in regards to the recommendation? Do you think, because what we're looking in real terms is which page 193, 194, the recommendations, are we looking at, do we think what the management's response in particular, is that fit for purpose? Are we comfortable with that? And if there's any additionality we need to add to that. So I'll come back to you first, Jane. Is it something you want to comment on?
Well, yes, I was just wondering whether we needed to have any sort of timetable attached to recommendation 2 and 3 on those, reference number 2 and 3. I'm not sure whether we do, but especially since we will be coming back in 6 months to find out whether everything's happened as it should. But the issue about 313 is simply to take a consistent approach to telling members what is being spent on the capital programme. And I think that's what we need to have in as an extra recommendation.
Stephen? Thanks, Jane.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think the only emphasis I would maybe put would be where it's got the management response. I mean, the agreement there is only to consider what the recommendation is, rather than to agree to take on board the recommendation. So I'd be more interested to see how that comes back so that we can have a further look at really where we should take it or how strong the recommendation should be considered, if you like. But that was the point I was really wanting to make.
Richard, I'm going to ask you to just come in and comment in regards to, because this is obviously your report, the recommendations came from yourself, and it's going back to the language, should, will, consider, must. I wonder if you could just apply your rationale against that. I'd put a question mark against 3.1.3, and it was around about the Capital Strategy Group are considering this, the point that Richard, Stephen just made, sorry, Richard, and it was a, okay, they might consider it, but what do they actually do it? What's the outcome? What do we get from that? Richard, can I bring you in at this point, please?
Thank you, Chair. To some extent, the information that is provided to different committees on the capital programme is actually up to the committee which receives the report. Certainly, in reviewing that, we felt that members may benefit from a more detailed programme. But as to how that's delivered back, the action agreed was actually the Capital Strategy Group, which is a group of senior officers, would look at this and then come back with their suggestions. I wonder if that helped.
Maybe it is. I mean, that, you're obviously telling us that that will come back at some point in time, but it's just, I suppose it's, is it timelines, when will we see that, what format, make sure that it's this committee, because we obviously have a keen eye on this. So just, if you can give us reassurances, but it will come back to this committee, we'll see it again, and at what kind of point in time, I think, Rich, is what we're thinking. Maybe Liz, I don't know if you can add to that as well. We're being detailed here, a bit more detailed than normal, but I think we're keen to see the decisions that we're making, how they're applied and adhered to. Liz, do you want to even come back in regards to the process?
There is a follow-up process that takes place for the internal audit report. So yes, you will get a progress report on how these are being implemented, and perhaps that the other two issues about risk management and the information in reports could be reflected in that update report about improvements that are being made.
Thanks, Liz. I mean, that certainly covers it for me. I'm looking at Stephen's nodding, and Jane, Councillor Maitland, are you content with that?
Fine, yep, fine.
Excellent, thank you. Appendix number 3 is the internal audit report, follow-up for the 18-19 main financial systems audit. So I'll open up to members first, looking physically within the room itself. And I'm looking online to see if anybody's coming in. I'm not seeing anybody coming in, so...
Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Young, John. Sorry, John, over to you.
Chair. Page 197, 5.5. The audit report anticipated, as a result of the intended acquisition of a new leisure management system, I presume that's DG1's leisure management system, the council transferred to the same merchant card system, and that hasn't happened. Is that ongoing, this move to just have one merchant for all card transactions?
Richard?
If I may come in, Chair. My understanding is that the new leisure management system is still using a different merchant service provider, and I don't know of any plans to unify that. Thank you.
Would it be financially favourable to the council to have a single supplier?
Thank you, Chair. That's possibly not a question for me to be able to answer. I know that certainly in terms of administrative processes, to have a unified system might be easier, but I'm not sure about the financial viability aspect. Thank you.
So I would normally put that to Paul Garrett, but I see Kevin Garrett has got his hand up, so I'll give you the first chance, Kevin, and we'll move on to Paul if John doesn't feel satisfied.
Thank you, Chair. I hope members can hear me. Good morning. Yes, on this point in particular, there are certain efficiencies, operational efficiencies, that emerge from having a single merchant provider. The biggest issue originally, so that's for the previous iteration of the management system, was to do with differential charges to customers. And so when it originally started, we didn't used to charge customers for card transactions and so on, and therefore the council took the hit. Later, we moved to, there was a general move towards charging customers the costs of this stuff. And what it meant was that somebody using a card, and particularly a particular kind of card, at one of our leisure centres wound up paying a larger charge than the council had negotiated around its other transactions. So that this was concerning us. It also is the case that the differentiated system created difficulties for our income management team. They had consistent problems with trying to make sure that correct information came through to allow it to be matched into the banking deposits that were made. So overall, it was creating extra work and extra problems. So we argued very strongly when this procurement was taking place, that it should be included in the specification that the council's existing merchant service provider, the facility should be able to support that arrangement. And it in the end, it didn't get included, or it got overlooked, or it was not possible to do it. So we're back to the same situation. It's not quite as bad as it used to be, but we're kind of almost on a point of principle now in internal audit on this issue. So we took this question to management and said, you didn't deliver this. What are you doing about it? And they said, we'll try and look at it with our service provider to see what we can do. And that's kind of, we've not followed up on that since, or I've not followed up on that since. So it is the case that they've got an obligation to consider as best as they can aligning with our existing merchant service provider, which is, obtained through a procurement process, and then allows us to make consistent or experience consistent charges. And then those charges that we receive in respect of card transactions are then collated and checked centrally for that provider. For the other provider, that work has to be done within the service. So this is why it's a bit of a problem. It's a bit of a deep technical issue, I'm sorry. But in effect, this is one of these issues that I'm determined we shall bottom out this time round, having not managed to get a solution previously. So it is something that's under review. Certainly we'll be coming back to you with the report, with the follow-up report at some point to sort of say, we've knocked this one off, or no, it remains a problem. But it does feature in our, income management and side of reporting and that sort of stuff. So hopefully we'll make progress and we'll get somewhere with it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, John. Thanks, Kevin. I think I've got Councillor Maitland, then Thompson. Jane, is that correct, or is that previously?
You're absolutely right, you do. It's just a follow-up on the question there about, well, does it appear for us to follow through, if you see what I mean, that issue about the cards? Where would it appear for us to say, oh yes, we decided that should be pushed through, but it's not on any particular recommendation, or have I missed it?
Chair, can I comment on that? Yes, it is the case. It's not a recommendation, and therefore the normal follow-up arrangements wouldn't pick this up. But if I give you my personal assurance that I will come back to you on this issue through some mechanism or another, because as I say, I'm more determined than ever that we should bottom this one out. In the end, we may just have to accept that the sport and leisure system and its arrangements cannot be feed into our existing merchant service provider. But if you like, I would want to be very strongly assured that that is the case, and it's not just a matter of we haven't got round to it. So it's something that I will take on personally, and that I will report back personally to the committee at an appropriate time. If you let me give you that assurance and accept that assurance, I think that will help us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Kevin. So, Councillor Thompson, Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a quick question on 8.3 on page 199 in relation to, well, it just sort of says, this does not meet the definition of activity-based budgeting. So we as historically, we get a sort of booklet every year before, to consider how we spend our money and with a view to going forward and how we spend it in future. And it's called activity-based budgeting. If it doesn't meet the definition of activity-based budgeting, what is it, and what should we be getting?
I'm not sure who's answering it. Kevin, you've counted the last couple, but it's up to yourselves, or Richard, whoever it may be.
Thank you, Chair. As you observed, there previously was a booklet went out with the budget with the revenue budgets, which anticipated the level of activity that went against each budget. What we understand by activity-based budgeting is that the revenue budgets are varied depending on the actual activity that a service provides. So if services are able to provide less activity, then they would consequently have a reduced revenue budget for that particular year. Now, whether that's practical for all aspects of the council's budget, I'm not sure, but that's what is meant by activity-based budgeting, and it's certainly something that I think the council is looking to move towards. Thank you.
That'll have to do, Chair. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, for your question. I see that Annex 1 rolls right into Appendix 3, it's part of it. And Malcolm, I've actually got, you're not down here on the thing speak, but I do note that in the 3.5 you might have had a point to make from previous discussions if you're there. That's all right. So
no, it's all right. I'm still continuing trying to caught me on the hop here. It was actually about the system development by BTS, and it's you know, the cost involved with trying to alter the system to set in safeguards, and I just wondered if it would be potentially worth looking at another avenue for installing that sort of thing.
I've got Kevin wants to speak written on here. That's historical. I'm trying to see what time. No, it's relevant. So Kevin, what is that for this particular question?
I can comment, Chair. Yeah, I hadn't stuck my hand up. I've obviously still got it up when I shouldn't have. So if you excuse me, I'll just take it down. Yes, so around this one, you know, to put context for the whole thing around journals and so on, we reported that we felt that journal entry processing was not sufficiently well controlled, and in effect we asked management to look at it again. Management did look at it again. A lot of journals are processed by accountants, and obviously there's a lot of confidence that they do the job proficiently and professionally, and that's fine. So there was a reservation, a reluctance, shall we say, within finance and procurement to introduce a system process for authorising journals, and that remains the case. So what we have here is we have our follow-up to our original work, and then we have a paper from the service itself basically saying, this is our position, we've considered what you said, we've got some mitigations to what you said, and we've got some changes that we are making to fit in with what you said. So overall, really, I think the response is satisfactory. I do have a concern that journal entries have previously operated in a significant number, and therefore, if you like, the implications of that and the risks associated with that might not have been fully appreciated. The difficulty is that we have a large and complex number of account codes and so on, and so there's some element of necessity involved in progressing journals, and some of our arrangements, for instance, capture costs into a central code initially, and then they're distributed to service codes and in detail and so on. All of that has to take place through journal entry working. So my concern was to recognise, to persuade finance to recognise the risks associated with journal entry. And I think our work did that. I think in the end, we did have a bit of a shoving and pushing around some of this, but the end position, I think, is satisfactory. Certainly, we will look at this the next time we do the accountancy review. This will be one of our major points of interest, is to say, well, what are you doing now? How have you progressed this? Have you further developed your thinking around risks associated with journal entries or not? Or are you content with what you've got? And we'll give an evaluation at that time.
Malcolm?
I was just another point just further down, 3.8, and it comes down to support and documentation for journal entries. Well, and clearly we've heard through the investigation of the accrual and the roads contract that suddenly we don't have any support and documentation, which I still find surprising. But surely there should be some register, or you mentioned in this part about logging the documentation on the system. It is for some entries and it isn't for others. But I think if people are going to have to go back and verify journals, then surely it should be compulsory that support and documentation is held.
So Malcolm, Kevin, I'll give you a chance to come back into that, but certainly we have two further speakers wanting to answer, so we have both Lindsay Wilson and Gillian Ross. So we'll give you both, Kevin. I'll be guided by yourself coming forward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll step aside because if you have service reps here, they're perhaps able to assure members better than I can about what arrangements they're making and what controls they've got in place. So by all means, please invite Lindsay and Gillian to speak.
Thank you. So we'll take it in order in which they came in. So Lindsay, you're first, then Gillian.
I'll defer to Gillian, Chair. I didn't have my hand up, so apologies if it has been up. I thought it was down, if that makes sense. I'll defer to Gillian, Chair. Thank you.
No, that's it. That's fine. That it came up in the column as well, so sorry about that. So Gillian, over to you, Gillian Ross.
Cheers. Thank you, Chair. It was just really to help maybe provide some assurance to Malcolm in relation to the changes and the processes that we've adopted in relation to these areas. In relation to the journals kind of query, we have applied a new process and procedure in place from the beginning of the financial year, as we've indicated within the report, that now requires further authorisation from a separate individual, whereby there is a transfer of resources between two separate departments. So where they are deemed to be of a significant value, they need to have a separate authorisation process within there. In relation to the documentation that's held in the system, if it's available to be able to be put into the system, that's normal processes as that it goes in. Where we sometimes have to rely on it being held by the service is where that's coming in from a feeder system. So where it's coming in from a system that does not form part of the overall Integra basis, that the details are coming through. So the likes of Mosaic, Total, the different kind of areas there, they come through separately. In relation to, as well, the comment that you've made in relation to BTS, I can advise that the complexities there are part of the integral part of Integra. It's the authorisation process. So the amendments that would need to be made there would be around the security groups, and it's very complex to make those changes, and that's the guidance that we've been advised from BTS, that to make those changes within the system would require significant levels of work because it's integrated into the overall security procedures that Lindsay referred to earlier. Happy to answer anything else if there's further clarification required.
Thanks for that, Gillian. Malcolm, are you content with that?
Yeah, I'm content, but once again we're coming up against this kind of a lot of these clunky systems that we seem to use. I find it surprising that there's no facility to upload a file as part of a transaction. I mean, even I can do that. I find it just a wee bit surprising. And equally, some of the journal entries, fine, you check them if it affects another service, but it could still require closer scrutiny, even if it doesn't. If it's an internal transfer within a department, there could be a reason for that. And it's one way of either masking problems or that sort of thing. So I would rather it was, things were authorised, even if it was internal.
Thanks, Malcolm. Thanks for them comments. I think the maintenance of the compliance and procedures is something we'll probably refer back to through all committees as time goes on. It'll be a hot topic as we move forward. So we have, I'll make this the last speaker. Councillor Maitland, Jane, you want to come back in and we'll move on.
No, it's been covered, thanks.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Jane. Okay, we'll just, if everyone's content, we'll move on to Appendix 4. That's the one about the grey mileage. Anything to add, Richard?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'm looking internally within the room. I found this informative. It was factual. I've not really got any comments at a personal level on it. It's factual information there. I think this comes back to, I think it was Malcolm in particular picked up on it previously, and that's the reason it came back, I think. So I do have we got somebody coming in? If it is, I can't see who it is. Is it? Oh, Jane, sorry, Jane. You're because of the one above. Sorry. Councillor Maitland, you're wanting in.
All it was really, again, is to ask about the difference between agreed and accepted, and about a timetable, I suppose, with respect to recommendation 8, 4.19, paragraph 4.19.
Thanks. I'm glad there is that because I actually noted it myself. I should have picked up on that. So within the recommendations, 209 and 210, some are saying accepted and some are saying agreed, so there seems to be a conflict of language there. Jane's pointed that out. Richard?
Thank you. As noted earlier, the report will come back to this committee in 6 months' time when there'll be an update on each of the actions that's taking place. But I don't actually have any knowledge as to whether the travel desk has actually proceeded over the past 6 months. I'm sorry.
We could pick that up in 6 months' time, Jane?
Yep, clearly we've got that option, really. But given how very anxious everybody is about climate change, I have to say I think it's really important we get a grip of this.
Okay, thanks very much, Jane. I mean, when I was reading, you've got CAS, you've got stars, and you've got members in particular. And just, I'll tell you what I'll do, rather than me rant on, I'll just bring Councillor Campbell in.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one. It's paragraph 4.3, where it mentions that if using their own car, that they maintain business insurance. I take it that's just for staff. It doesn't include the elected members.
I think it does. I think it does include business for elected members. We'll get absolute clarity on that before we come back to. So, Richard?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding would include elected members, but I think the onus is on us all as individuals to make sure that we're covered for the driving that we do. And if any doubts, to check with our own insurance companies. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Okay, thanks for that, Richard. I know I certainly, just as a matter of practice, I don't think it's financially to your detriment. Excellent. So if pick up on that, appendix number 5, internal audit report, payments to outside bodies and communities, major festival event strategy. The only real point, I'll look first for the wider committee. Anybody coming in? Don't see anybody coming in. Can it be made explicit to why the director asked for this? Who would answer that? That would be Richard or Kevin. It says the director asked for this. I enjoyed reading the report. I thought it was fair high level of compliance, but I just was intrigued to exactly why the director was asking for this.
Thank you, Chair. I can speak to that. Yes, when we built the plan originally, we went out to services and asked them if there were areas that they would find useful to have audit input. And the director came forward with a couple of suggestions. And so in terms of, right, well, putting it in the plan, we're not putting it in the plan just because you asked, because there is pressure on the plan, but it's a question of, okay, what's your concern? And it wasn't a specific concern as in, I don't think something is right. It was much more along the lines of, because these involve external payments, I'm looking for a higher level of assurance that we're doing this right, because those payments affect organisations, but they also affect perceptions of the council. So the director asked for this just as an area of, okay, this is an area which might engender some focus and interest from other parties and outside people. So I've described that as being in pursuit of good governance, and I think that's a fair comment. So that's why it got put in. There's another one similar. We divided the piece of work that we're asked to do into two. We've produced two separate reports. This is one of them. There's another one that will come to the next meeting of the committee, which we weren't unfortunately able to finalise for this meeting. But it sits around a sort of a good approach to governance. It's a positive thing. In other words, this is a directorate and a service saying, we would like some assurance around these issues, even though we don't think there's a problem. And that's a positive development for engaging with internal audit. So I was very pleased to be able to offer this work and to be able to do the work and make the recommendations that we've made, which, have been accepted, I think, and welcomed in some ways by the service. So that's the reasoning behind that, Chair.
Thanks, Kevin. Sounds like a model situation, really. That is exactly what we're looking for, isn't it? If we feel they're needing support, you've mentioned that a number of times over the years. You're not there to, you're not like a hawk looking over the prey. You're actually there to go in and add support and just try and keep people on the train track. So, no, it is a continuous improvement, as Lizzie's outlining, and it's great that the director came to you. I don't see any. There's nobody in the box. Councillor Thompson's wanting a question. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. It was actually just on the page 206 where it's touching on. I think it's the bottom of the section 4.7, where it says we were advised by Home Care Reablement and Support Service they were able to carry out annual checks to ensure their staff have adequate motor insurance and cover. And I think this maybe goes back again to. Sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon. Okay.
We'll give Stephen a chance.
No, it's fine. I think it's covered in a response to an earlier report, but that's fine. Sorry, Chair, my mistake.
No, thanks for that. I've done that so many times I've lost count. So I would move on to major festivals and events, and my particular question about the director had raised this. It didn't come from any other, and I'm quite comfortable and assured in regards to Kevin's response. Anybody else got any other points? No. So we've been asked to note, in regards to these, to note and comment, which we definitely have. The audit report's finalised. I'd like to thank the report authors for their input in regards to them. Item number 8. So now I'm becoming acutely aware we've got another committee at 2 o'clock. I'm not going to rush things. I'll just take things. 1:30, is it? Oh well, right, okay. Maybe we'll rush things a wee bit. So item number 8, we've agreed. Item number 7, we've considered out and against the 2019-20 internal audit plan and annual controls assurance statement. So I take it it's yourself, Richard, that will speak to this. It's Kevin. Sorry, it's
Chair,
Kevin.
I'm
Kevin.
speaking to this one.
Go on then. Thanks.
Okay, nothing to add to the report. Just happy to take questions on it.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you very much. So I'm looking physically at members around the table first and waiting to see if there's anybody coming in regards to any particular questions. I've got some points picked up. With Councillor Maitland, I'll let Councillor Maitland come in and I'll gather my thoughts. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much. Kevin, it's the issue in 3.5, which is about the IJB, the work that we were going to do jointly with the IJB. That things have moved on, but I am, I think, probably, along with some other members, a little bit nettled because this has slithered out from being a joint audit into simply having joint assurances, and we were already being thrown a sop that we were going to be allowed to look at delayed discharges as opposed to a much more important issue, a structural and strategic issue, which is about how good is our integration itself. And really what I'm sort of wanting to find out is whether we can roll back a little bit on the on progress and what you how you see this going forward, because at the moment we're not even going to get what we had thought, which was the delayed discharge piece of information and work. I just want to put a marker down that I'm not totally happy with what's happened.
Thanks for that, Kevin.
I hesitate to comment, Chair, because I think these are matters for members and the relationship and the partnership. From my point of view, I can comment on that, which was what we were originally approached. The IJB itself thought it was a good idea to seek a joint audit. That was a novel idea when it was first mooted. I gave assurances that such could be delivered by auditors working together. We develop a work program and so on. And then it took a bit of a while to sort of for proposals to emerge and concentration to come on those. And the one we wound up with at the end of delayed discharge seemed to have merit, because traditionally, of course, social work is considered or is perceived to have a contribution to delayed discharges, and delayed discharges within NHS Dumfries Galloway were beginning to move in the wrong direction. I don't think we've ever had dreadful problems, but there were kind of the indicators were moving in a direction which suggested there were difficulties. So it certainly had merit, and it could have been delivered. We were opening up discussions on details on it just as in February, just as COVID came. And then I was somewhat disappointed to find several months later that the position had changed within the NHS and that they were talking about joint assurances. I don't know what that means. For their accounts, for the IJB's accounts, they do receive assurances from me as to scope and coverage. So the controls assurance statement that I do for the council, I don't give them, but I did give them some information which allows them to place reliance on the work that we do and that sort of stuff. So there are already joint assurances in place around accounting. So I'm not quite sure what's meant about this, but they are developing in a different way from us. You know, they have different passions and different interests and so on, and perhaps different approaches. So it's yet to be explored. The key point really I was trying to make here was that we didn't conclude that work, unfortunately. And also in the next report, I'm telling you, I'm not making any provision for a joint audit because it's not come to maturity. The discussions have not come to maturity yet. So it's important you understand that that's out at the moment. I would hope by next year, by when I'm reporting the plan in February or March next year for 21-22, that we'll have something back in around this and that we'll be able to receive members' support and approval to a project that might emerge there. But it's a wait and see type situation.
Jane, just before you come back in, I just wonder if, so obviously the chair and vice chair of the Audit Risk and Scrutiny Committee of the Council and the chair and vice chair of the Audit and Risk Committee of Integration Joint Board meet on occasion, not so regularly recently, but they do meet on occasion, and that'll start to take place more often now. I think after these circumstances have started to change. They meet with the both chief internal auditors of both NHS, Dumfries Galloway and Dumfries Galloway Council. I wonder if that could be brought up there and you could address that point there.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, indeed, I'm absolutely sure we can. And I think it's really just to put a marker down for ourselves that, you know, while we arguably should have been a little bit sharper as members to realise what was happening, because I think this happened in the IJB without us quite understanding that we were slipping from a full strategic audit into integration to delayed discharge. And I'm really just, I suppose, saying that I note with disappointment the lack of joint audit on delayed discharge in this particular issue. So, yes, it is really a marker for ourselves, Chairman. I think we missed a trick.
Quite happy to have that as a 2.3, Councillor Maitland-Jane, if you don't, to note your disappointment. I think it's reflective, it's on public record, and we can certainly use that as a tool when we have our further discussions. Councillor Scobie's want to come in?
Yeah, Chairman, I'm just looking at the whole issue here and reflecting on what was said earlier by Stephen in terms of the Council's Social Work Committee, you know, being responsible for some of the services but not in control. Particularly the Health and Social Care Partnership and how it is delivered. And reflecting again on the report that's coming before full council on Thursday in terms of there is a review of service in terms of the IJB in relation to the NHS and the council. So what's, delivering a joint review is what it says in 3.5. And whether we are, that there is this relationship between the NHS, Council and IJB that we maybe should be reviewing. Is it as robust and as healthy as it should be in terms of delivery of services and responsibilities? So I think it is important that we do focus on this. And I know Kevin said they're coming back to 2021-22 in the plan. But maybe it's for Audit and Risk to see, are we getting the proper services and the delivery and value for money?
So correct me if I'm wrong, Jane, but I think, and Kevin, so it was a piece of work that would have been jointly commissioned, so to speak, but it wasn't commissioned the wrong language, but it's just a way of describing, but jointly done between the Council's internal auditors and NHS in regards to bed block and so on and so forth. But Jane's made our views wider, clear in the wider aspects. So I think there's two different levels. Maybe at that point I think your reason is absolutely right for full council on Thursday. This was a piece of just internal audit work I think Jane's referring to in particular. So we'll maybe come back to that. So if that point's covered, thinking of the time, it's 13:14 according to that clock. I'll just make a couple of quick points, if that's okay. 224 hasn't got it's appendix 224, hasn't actually got a paragraph number 2 at Kevin, but so any significant matters arising from internal audit work, including non-compliance with important audit recommendations, are reported to the Head of Finance and Procurement, as the Council's office are designed under Section 95 of the Local Government Act 1973. Internal audit reports identifying any systems, weaknesses, non-compliance with established controls and improved opportunities are issued to applicable directors, heads of service and operational management. Then the last sentence is, this is what I'm emphasising on, and it's a reported versus made available. They are also made available to elected members. Kevin, that was, when I was reading that, I thought, okay, so these are officially reported, there's a process, it's clear, but it feels like elected members have got to try and identify these and pull them forward and draw them out. So just if you could clarify that particular point, please. And the other point was the very last paragraph, 224, leading on to 224 to 225. So it talks about it's during the year of an independent internal investigation was undertaken at the financial deficit which arose in the form of contract roads operator repair. As part of the reporting of the investigation in July, members have been advised that external specialists is to be commissioned to provide further assurances around this financial delivery of the contract. To date, it says to date, Council has not identified any evidence that fraud or corruption contributed to the deficit in the contract. Just this is dated 7th of August. I notice, have you got any updates in regards to that? Is that position still the same as far as you're aware, or has it changed? Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the CAS, the Controls Assurance Statement, does follow a little bit of a formula in the way that it presents information. And it is a bit formulaic, I appreciate that. So yes, it is describing a process in terms of, you know, the audit's role, what it does, where it goes, and so on. It is a bit clunky, so I apologise for that. Members are very important in that process. I thought what you were going to say was, why have we stuck you at the back? And that's just inadvertent. It's not meant to diminish the role of members or the importance of members. It's meant to be communicating that actually our job is to, in simple terms, find out and report. And then it's for management to respond to that, to make proposals for dealing with that. And all of that process involves engagement with members as well as engagement with us ultimately. So I'm sorry if the language in the CAS is a bit sort of ugly and horrible. I'll have a look at it again for next year, if you don't mind. In respect of the comments around the Trunk Road contract investigation, yes, that's under fraud reporting. I kind of struggle with this, whether to include something in this or not. And I thought I cannot write an annual assurance statement without referencing Trunk Road contract. But there's been a great deal of work and a great deal of energy and a great deal of analysis and understanding beginning to emerge around that. And I think there's some good stuff going on around this, and the run out on this is shaping up and should be shaping up quite well. I felt my responsibility sits around referencing it under the fraud reporting section. And in effect, what I'm trying to communicate is that if any concern does emerge around the Trunk Road contract relating to fraud, then I would have to be reporting that. I would have to be including that in, because I have a responsibility not to manage fraud, not even to identify fraud, but in effect to report it where it occurs. So that's what this is trying to do. And it is the case that up until today, even, I have got no indication and there's no evidence to support that fraud or corruption played a part in the loss that occurred on that contract. But obviously, it's a question for members and for others, for senior managers as well. They've got the same question: is could it have played a part? And it's my understanding, although I am not up to speed with the forensic accounting work that's been commissioned, but it's my understanding that an aspect of that, at least, will come into that piece of work. You know, we have to ask ourselves the question: did it play a part? It's an obvious question. We may never be able to prove it either way. And I don't think we should be looking for proof either way. If anybody imagines that we can prove it didn't happen, then they're being unrealistic. The point is to look for some kind of indication, to make a reasonable effort to make some kind of indication that if it's there, can we see it, and has it made a contribution? And the conclusion today is that no, it's not. It hasn't made a contribution to that loss, or there's no evidence that it's made a contribution to that loss. But that absolute certainty will never exist, even if we do masses of work around this issue. We still can never say with absolute certainty there wasn't an aspect of that. So I hope that answers your question, Chair.
Well, thanks so much, Kevin, for your honest appraisal of that. It's much appreciated, so it is. And it leads us right back to the recommendations of no further speakers. Another comment from Councillor Maitland. So I just wondered, when it comes to yourself, Jane, are you on a third recommendation is what I was looking at, I think, on the page. And it'd just be, where am I? Sorry, here I am. So I'm on page 217, I think, for accuracy. First recommendation that we've been asked is to note and comment on the progress made in the 1920 internal audit plan as detailed as per Appendix 1. The second one, if we can agree that, which we can. And the second one is to note the internal audit's controls assurance statement for 1920 as per Appendix 2. And would you want to note your disappointment, Jane, in regards to what you outlined earlier, the internal audit, joint audit?
Please, Chairman, I think we should simply note with disappointment the lack of joint audit on delayed discharge with the integration joint board.
Excellent. Can we be agreed with that? Yep, thank you.
Would we still be looking for it to be carried out, Chair? Not only noting the disappointment, but that
would it be appropriate if the committee would like us to pursue the conversation? Because as Kevin reported in the report, the discussions are still ongoing. So would you like us to pursue a joint audit?
Yep, that's a good one. I think we've also picked, not specific within there, but the actions, certainly Jane as the Vice Chair and the Chair and Vice Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, I'll take that up with the two Chief Internal Auditors as well. So we will have that discussion, but it's absolutely right. If you don't mind, Liz, I think it's a belt and brace approach, but it's correct. Yep, no, we should. Are you content with that, Willie? Yep, okay. Item number 9 is Internal Audit Strategic Plan for 2023. We've been asked to approve the refreshed internal audit plan, audit charter, as per Appendix 1, and we've been asked to agree the strategic internal audit plan for 2020 to 2023 and the annual plan for 2021 as per Appendix 2. Richard or Kevin? Is it yourself, Richard, that's speaking to this? Kevin, sorry, Kevin. Get mixed up today. Kevin?
Yes, Chair. Again, happy to take questions. Just very, very briefly, it's a compressed plan for the balance of the year. We've started our, if you like, clock ticking on the 1st of August. We're doing some work from this plan already. We're progressing the main financial systems work. It's tight. We don't have as much resource as we've enjoyed in previous years. Therefore, the scope of what we can do gets a bit narrowed. But we've got a decent programme of work here, I think, that's timely, and I'm commending it to members for approval.
Looking around the room, interest of time, everybody seems to be in agreement with that. I'll just check the list. I don't see MD typing or coming in with anything. No. So, we're happy to approve 2.1 and agree 2.2 as outlined within the report. Sorry for a lack of scrutiny, Kevin. We'd like to do more with that, but we're running behind the clock now. So item number 10. Stephen, was that you want in there, no? Aye, go on, Stephen. Councillor Thompson.
No, I was just laughing inwardly at the rush to get to the end of the meeting. Okay, we accept that. So item number 10 is regulations of investigative powers, Scotland Act 2000 RIPSA, use of powers in future action plans. We have got an option to adjourn and re-adjourn and reset, but I mean, we'll go ahead. Unless anybody's got any pressing, nobody came in with any questions. I would never like to stop debate in any way, so feel free to ask anything you want. So item number 10, purpose of the report is to consider issues relating to the regulation of investigative powers. The only question I had on this was any more level of detail other than what was in the report, and maybe that's too sensitive for in here. But, So, Liz, is it you leading this?
Very routine, and yes, as the report says, we've set out for you the improvement plan that we have going forward, and the updated policies will come to the Communities Committee for approval in due course.
Okay, I'm opening up to members. We're in no rush. I don't see any messages being typed. No, we have. We've got Councillor Maitland. Jane, come in.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I took my eye off the ball for a moment. We're on 11, are we, Chairman?
10, we're heading to 11.
10.
You could be first. You could be first on the list. Item number 10. So at 2.1, we note the single use of the RIPSA as in 2019, as per outlined in paragraph 3.6 and 2.2, is to endorse the draft action plan as referred in paragraph 3.8 and detailed in the appendix. Everybody's content to do that? We're getting agreement. Okay, and I've got nobody online. So item number 11 is a scrutiny reviews. Liz, I think this will be your report, is it?
Again, just to keep you up to date, we're planning to have the workshop at the end of October on the first two scrutiny reviews, and the next two will be a slightly extended timetable.
Thank you. So we'll all see more details. So, Councillor Maitland, you're first to speak on this. Jane.
Oh, thank you very much. Ian, it is simply the scrutiny review that has been completed, I'm told, about improving information data sharing. 2 years later, here we are, and I would like to be absolutely clear that we've got what we wanted, because there's nothing more important now, particularly post-COVID, to realise that the information sharing that we're going to be doing in terms of home teams and helping people in their homes on health and social care, it's incredibly important, and I want to be sure that this committee has had its wishes fulfilled.
Thanks, Jane. So just before you come in, Liz.
It's certainly on the forward programme, and you will get an update progress report on it.
So it was raised at Economy and Resources last week as well, Jane, just for your information, by myself, and I raised it also with the Chief Executive this week, because it wasn't finished, it wasn't complete at all. We are to get a report further back as it's outlined, but the actual piece of work, we got told at Economy and Resources it would be October time before it was complete, and there's still snagging blocks in place. But I got a reassurance from the Council's Chief Executive Officer that that would be expedited if possible. So we took them as assurances. We have Councillor John Young wanting in now, I think. John?
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted reassurance that what was discussed earlier in the meeting regarding a possible review of the commissioning of external services and external providers, particularly perhaps for social care and education, is going to be part of the updated timetable.
It would not be part of this scrutiny review programme at the moment. You have, after quite a long process, identified the 4 that are in your current programme, but we can certainly bring that forward to you in the future as you look to your next programme.
Thanks, Liz.
Thanks for that question, John. Just one small thing, 3.3, I think it says grow the local economy through the procurement process. I'm sure it was growing. I could be wrong there. I'm sure it was growing the local economy through the procurement process was the language that we were using, to be pedantic. I was absolutely comfortable with this report, and like I say, with things are coming forward at a pace. Okay, so we've been asked to note the updated timetable and support arrangements for the... Oh, sorry, Katie. Councillor Hagman, you're coming in, Katie.
Thank you, Chair. It's just looking at the second one of the scrutiny reviews that we're looking at first of all, so the support for elected members. So I see that we're going to have a workshop on the findings and recommendations. Will there be an opportunity for us to put forward our own recommendations at the workshop on October 27th for them to come back on the 10th of December?
I think that's that's what it's all about, but I'll let Liz answer that.
It's just the way it's phrased. It's just we're discussing the findings, like the findings have already been made before we've been involved. So that's fine. If there's going to be feedback opportunities there, I'm happy to leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. In the interest of time, we'll leave it at that, and Katie. But there absolutely will. There'll be no restriction on questions when it comes to these scrutiny workshops. So we've no further people wanting in this time. So item number 11. Thank you very much. We'll just move on to item number 12, which is the annual report for the Audit and Risk and Scrutiny Committee. So we're being purposes report. We have one that we are I don't know if we've left it adjourned. I'll just take a governance. I got on the last one. We'll continue. So the next, I'm not sure if the next meeting was at 1:30 at the conclusion of this meeting, Archie?
Chair, Councillor McKee's actually went to a pre-meeting of the pension sub with the trade unions and the board as opposed to, so it's actually at 2 o'clock. So.
Oh, that's excellent. It's 2 o'clock the meeting, so we're finishing. Clear? Yep, clear.
Yeah, the pension board actually do have a meeting at 1:30, a very short agenda, not in here, but elsewhere in the building.
Okay, that was my mix-up, my misunderstanding. I thought when you had said the meeting at 1:30 it was actually taking place in here, so we do have until 2 o'clock. Excellent. So, I can take the foot off the pedal now. Okay, right. So I do apologise. I mean, I do think we should have to take our comfort breaks as well, and this has been extended, but we've had a good debate. So this is, again, the purpose of the report is to agree the arrangements for the committee's annual report for the period of December 19 to December 20. So we've been asked to consider and agree assessment arrangements for the preparation of the annual report, this is as per recommendation 2.1, I should say, on the work and performance of this committee as set out in paragraphs 3.2 and 3.3 and in appendix 1, and 2.2 we've been asked to agree any amendments and additions to the approach. So I will open it up to members first, physical look around the room. So again, this comes back to our remit, our roles and remits. I think ultimately, hopefully this will allow us to achieve whether we're actually, how well we're complying with what our roles and remits are. And refer back, I thought the checklist in Appendix 2 was really good. Just to remind ourselves of that and go through that as a committee. What we should and shouldn't be doing as a committee at a personal level, relationships with officers, so on and so forth. There's no hands whatsoever coming up. There's no CMD coming in online either. Maybe there's a desire to finish up for lunch, there probably is. Right, okay, can we, as per 2.1, can we consider as per Appendix 1, which is, it's just a frontness. We've seen it every time we read a report, it's there, so we'll consider it every one anyways, but actually take that as being considered. And 2.2, agree any amendments and agree to the approach. No amendments have come forward. I don't see, I've got them myself. Don't see anything online. A wee second. No. So if that's the case, I would like to thank everybody for their time.
Chair, just before, thought our policy in the council wasn't to have 2 meetings on the same day.
Next time, we'll be aware of that next time.
Honestly, this has been a good agenda of the day, but I think later on the last half hour we've just rushed through what we've been trying to get through.
Absolutely have. We do have a process. We could adjourn and come back, but ultimately, you're absolutely right. So we'll take cognizance of that in the future, and we'll try and apply it so we get either an afternoon session or an early afternoon. But we'll certainly, the chair, vice chair, and our lead officer will discuss that and make sure we try and comply with your desires, Davy. Thanks very much for your comments. I have no further business. Thanks everybody for their time and their hard work today. That's everybody else good in that. Thank you. Thanks very much.